The path ahead is fragile, child, but hope lights the way. You must believe in the light within you.
You are enough. You are worthy. The moon goddess makes no mistakes. That was what Elder Marin whispered to every young Omega who trembled on the steps of the mating ceremony. Every frightened girl who clutched her chest and prayed that tonight would be the night the bond finally chose her. Sarah believed it. For 22 years, she believed it the way the drowning believe in lifeboats. Desperately, completely, with the kind of faith that only survives because the alternative is too dark to face. She believed it when her sister Lyra was chosen at 17, golden and radiant, swept into the arms of a beta merchant who looked at her like she was made of starlight. She believed it when she attended her second ceremony, her third, her fourth. She even believed it quietly and painfully that when she walked into her fifth mating ceremony in a pale blue dress her mother had sewn with trembling, hopeful hands, and stood in that moonlit courtyard surrounded by 200 wolves who laughed, whispered, and looked straight through her like she was made of glass. Unclaimed Sarah. That's what they called her in the market, in the temple halls, in the breath between sentences when her own mother thought she wasn't listening. But Sarah would learn, in the most brutal, breathtaking way imaginable, that being invisible to everyone was exactly what made her visible to him. And he was the one man in 7 packs that no sane woman ever wanted to see looking her way. Chapter 1. The Girl the Moon Forgot. The dress had taken her mother 3 weeks to finish. Sarah knew this because she had watched it happen. Watched her mother, Hilda, bend over the fabric every evening after supper, needle moving in and out of pale blue linen with the focused, prayerful energy of a woman building something she needed to believe in. Hilda never said it outright. She didn't have to. Every stitch was a sentence. This time. Please, this time. Let it be this time. Sarah had said nothing. She'd brought her mother tea, kissed her on the cheek, and carried the weight of that silent hope like a stone in her chest all the way to the night of the ceremony. The Veyrath Pack's mating ceremony was held on the last full moon of the harvest season, as it had been for 300 years. It took place in the grand courtyard of the Alpha's estate, a sprawling, torchlit space ringed with silver birch trees whose leaves had gone deep amber in the autumn chill, and hundreds of candles floated in glass bowls along the stone walls. The scent of cedar and crushed herbs hung in the cool air. It was, objectively, beautiful. Sarah noticed the beauty, the way you notice a painting in a room where someone is screaming. She arrived with her mother and her aunt Delphine, just as the courtyard began filling. Pack members in their finest clothes, young unbonded wolves arranged in loose clusters on either side of the great ceremonial floor. The males on the left, the females on the right. Between them, the open space where the moon's choosing was supposed to happen, where eyes met across the distance, where the bond, that invisible, instinctive pull that every wolf was supposed to feel, was supposed to ignite. Sarah had stood in this space 4 times before. She knew exactly what happened, and she knew the way the energy in the room built slowly, like a tide coming in. The way young betas began drifting toward each other, pulled by something ancient and cellular. She knew the moment the first bond snapped into place, because the couple would go very still simultaneously, like 2 people hearing the same song from opposite ends of a field. She knew the gasps from their families, the tears, the joy. She knew, with the precise and terrible knowledge of someone who had watched it happen to everyone around her, that none of it had ever happened to her. "You look lovely," her Aunt Delphine said, adjusting the collar of Sarah's dress with brisk, efficient hands. Delphine was a practical woman who expressed love through small physical corrections. Sarah had always found it comforting. Tonight, it made her want to cry. I look the same as always, Sarah said. Blue suits you. Delphine's eyes moved over her with the careful assessment of someone trying to find the right words. You have your grandmother's eyes, you know. Unusual. People notice unusual. People noticed unusual the way they noticed a stone in their shoe. Sarah thought. Persistently, irritatingly, and with a strong desire to remove it. She didn't say this. She smiled, because her mother was watching, and Hilda's hope was a fragile thing that Sarah had spent 22 years trying not to crack. The courtyard filled quickly. Sarah found her position on the female side, third row from the front, slightly to the left. The same position she always chose because it gave her a clear sight line to the ceremonial arch and a quick path to the edge of the crowd if she needed air. The 5 ceremonies had made her strategic about suffering. Around her, the other unbonded females hummed with nervous, excited energy. To her left, a girl named Bryn, 19, soft-faced, with a cloud of dark hair pinned up with silver clips, kept touching her own collarbone where a bond mark would eventually sit. To her right, 2 girls she didn't know whispered together and giggled, scanning the male side with bright, hungry eyes. Sarah scanned the male side too, but differently. Not with hunger. With the tired, cataloging attention of someone taking inventory of a situation they already know the outcome of. She saw the young betas, the ones who would be matched tonight, she guessed, or most of them. There were always more matches than she expected. The moon was generous with everyone except her. That she saw a few alphas on the far left. Elder Counselor Doran's son, broad and boring, who had been brought to 3 ceremonies and never bonded. 2 brothers from the merchant quarter whose names she could never remember. And at the very edge of the group, partially obscured by shadow, a figure she didn't recognize. She almost looked away. Almost. Something stopped her. Not the bond. She knew better than to mistake curiosity for destiny by now. Something else. An awareness, primal and quiet, like the feeling you get when a storm is coming and the air pressure changes before a single cloud appears. The figure at the edge of the male group was tall, uncommonly so, even for an alpha. He stood the way people stand when they're not performing stillness, but actually genuinely still, not restless, not scanning the room with performative casualness. He stood with his arms loose at his sides and his head tilted very slightly forward, like a man solving a problem in his mind that the rest of the room couldn't see. He wore dark clothes that were fine but not decorated. No ceremonial embellishment, no pack insignia that she could identify from this distance. His face, when the torchlight caught it, was... She searched for the right word and landed on severe. Not ugly, not harsh exactly, structured in a way that looked less like handsomeness and more like the geography of a dangerous place, dramatic, arresting, without any particular interest in whether you found it beautiful or not. She didn't know him. In a pack of 300, that was unusual. She filed it away in the part of her mind she used for puzzles and returned her attention to the ceremony beginning. Elder Marin took her position at the ceremonial arch, ancient and upright in her white robes, silver hair coiled at the back of her head. The crowd quieted with the particular hush that fell when authority and ritual combined. Marin had led 30 years of mating ceremonies. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the specific gravity of someone who had watched enough human joy to no longer be impressed by it. "Children of the moon," she began, and Sarah mouthed the words faintly, having memorized them by her 3rd ceremony. "We gather as we have gathered since the first pack drew breath beneath these stars, not to arrange, not to select, but to witness. The moon goddess does not ask your preferences. She does not consult your mother's or your pride, and she looks beneath the skin to what the soul is made of, and she chooses accordingly. A lovely sentiment, Sarah thought, with an affection that was only slightly acidic, beautifully rendered, completely immune to evidence. The ceremony moved in the way it always moved. Marin's opening words, the lighting of the communal fire at the center of the arch, the moment of silence where everyone was supposed to open themselves to the pull of the bond. Sarah opened herself dutifully. She always did. She had stopped being embarrassed about it. Nothing. Around her, she could feel the shift. The subtle change in atmospheric pressure when bonds began to activate. The girl named Bryn beside her went suddenly and completely rigid, her hand flying to her throat. Sarah watched her locate the bond across the courtyard with the glazed, a stricken expression of someone who has just been struck by lightning and doesn't know yet whether to laugh or fall down. She watched Bryn walk forward, pulled across the ceremonial floor toward a young male Sarah didn't recognize, and felt something that wasn't quite envy and wasn't quite grief, a gray familiar thing that she had no better name for after 5 years. She watched 2 more pairs find each other. 3. A pair of third-year unbonded elders. She felt a particular wash of warmth for them, who had apparently been waiting for each other all along and simply hadn't been ready until this specific moon. She watched and stood still and let the ceremony happen around her like weather. 40 minutes in, the energy of the courtyard had shifted from anticipation to celebration. Families were embracing their newly bonded children, and Elder Marin was smiling in that reserved, satisfied way she had. Most of the unbonded had either found their matches or were beginning to drift toward the edges. The ones who hadn't been chosen tonight, who would return next year or the year after, or not at all. Sarah was one of the last still standing in the ceremonial space. She was aware of it. You couldn't not be. As the crowd thinned and the remaining unbonded became countable on 2 hands, the ones who hadn't been chosen became visible in a way that the crowd had previously obscured. She saw the moment people started to notice her. The particular kind of notice that was pity wearing the mask of kindness. She saw her mother's face at the edge of the courtyard. Hilda was smiling. She was still smiling, with the desperate, maintained brightness of a woman who had decided she would not stop smiling until there was no longer any mathematical possibility of tonight being salvageable. Sarah loved her for it in a way that hurt more than cruelty would have. She was about to turn, about to begin the walk toward the edge of the ceremonial floor. That familiar, practiced walk she had perfected over 5 years, dignified and unhurried, the walk of someone who had planned to leave all along. When she heard it, not the bond, something worse, laughter. It came from a cluster of young women near the refreshment table, older daughters of the pack's merchant families, the kind of girls who wore their cruelty lightly because they'd never had reason to set it down. Sarah knew their faces. She knew their names. She had attended ceremonies alongside them for 3 years. 5 years. One of them, Petra, merchant family eldest, red hair and a sharp chin, said to her companion, not particularly bothering to lower her voice. 5 mating ceremonies. Honestly, at some point you have to wonder if it's the moon sending a message. Her companion, Lena, Petra's shadow and echo, as she had always been, laughed behind her hand. My mother says some omegas just aren't meant to be bonded, that the moon can't work with what isn't there. Sarah kept walking. She had learned, was still learning, the specific art of not letting her face show what her chest was doing. Can you imagine? Petra continued, and her voice carried the effortless cruelty of someone who has never needed to imagine anything painful. Coming back, year after year, wearing your best dress, and leaving alone every time? I would die." "You might be surprised what you survive," Sarah thought, and kept walking. She had almost made it to the edge of the ceremonial floor when her foot caught on the uneven paving stone she had navigated without incident. 4 ceremonies running. And tonight, because the universe had apparently decided that dignity was a luxury, she stumbled. Not a fall, a stagger, one hand flying out, the other catching herself. But the stumble knocked her shoulder into the arm of the person standing directly at the edge of the torchlight, and she felt the impact, felt the utter immovability of them, and looked up. Into the face of the man she had noticed at the edge of the male group. Up close, severe was still the right word. His eyes were a shade that her brain initially processed as gray and then corrected. Not gray, but a very dark green. The color of deep water under winter ice. His jaw was sharp enough to have opinions. He was looking at her with an expression that she couldn't immediately categorize, which was unusual. She was good at reading people, had learned early to read rooms and faces for information, since information was the only currency she'd ever reliably had. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He wasn't looking at her with the performative non-reaction of someone pretending not to have seen her stumble. He was looking at her the way you look at something that surprises you. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, stepping back, regaining her balance. "I wasn't watching where I was. I heard what they said." His voice was low, not gentle exactly. It didn't have the practiced softness of people who were used to handling fragile things, but it was level, unmeasured, like a man who chose his words the way a surgeon chose instruments. Sarah blinked. "I'm sorry?" The women at the table. His eyes, brief and precise, tracked to Petra's cluster and back. "I heard what they said." The statement landed without elaboration. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't offer the nervous social correction of someone embarrassed on her behalf. He simply stated a fact and waited, in that very still way he had, to see what she would do with it. Sarah held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was comfortable. "People say a lot of things," she said quietly. "Most of them aren't worth the air they travel on." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile. Not quite. Something smaller and more interior than a smile. "No," he agreed. "They're not." A moment passed between them. The specific, suspended kind of moment that occurs when 2 people are in the middle of deciding something about each other. Then, from across the courtyard, she heard her mother calling her name. The relief in Hilda's voice at seeing her moving toward the edge. And the moment broke. Sarah stepped back, inclined her head in the wordless acknowledgement you gave strangers when the social interaction had been unexpectedly decent. Turned toward her mother. She did not look back. She told herself it was because there was no point. She told herself that the awareness she'd felt, that pressure shift, that quiet electric thing, was just the ambient energy of the ceremony, the moon's choosing affecting everyone in the courtyard, the emotional charge of being surrounded by new bonds. She told herself this all the way home, while her mother held her hand and said nothing, and the pale blue dress grew cold in the autumn air. She believed it right up until the moment, 3 days later, when the entire pack received word that Gavriel Draveth, Blood Alpha of the Ironvale Pack, the most feared and most dangerous unmated alpha in the known 7 territories, had requested a formal audience with Elder Morin, and had been seen by no fewer than 4 witnesses, asking her one specific question: "Who is the girl in the pale blue dress?" Chapter 2. The Name That Silenced Rooms. The name Gavriel Draveth did not arrive in Veyrath Pack territory the way most names did. It did not travel through the market in the easy, gossiping current of ordinary news. The kind of information that moved from stall to stall between haggling and pleasantries, worn smooth by repetition until it lost its edges. It did not drift into drawing rooms on the lips of merchant wives comparing notes over tea. It did not trickle. It did not meander. It landed, like something dropped from a great height onto a stone floor. It landed with a sound that made everyone in the vicinity go very still and check themselves for damage. Sarah heard it first from her Aunt Delphine, who heard it from the baker's wife, but who had it directly from the mouth of Elder Marin's personal attendant, a young woman named Soli, who was constitutionally incapable of keeping information to herself for longer than 20 minutes. By the time the name reached Sarah, it had passed through 6 people and lost none of its weight. Gabriel Draveth, Blood Alpha, Iron Veil Pack. He was asking about the girl in the pale blue dress. She was in the back garden when Delphine told her, pulling dead growth from the herb beds with the focused, methodical attention she gave tasks that required her hands to be busy while her mind worked. She heard the name. Her hands stopped moving. She sat back on her heels and stared at the middle distance for a moment that stretched longer than she intended. Sarah. Delphine's voice was careful in a way it almost never was. When Delphine was not a careful woman. She was efficient and direct, and had strong opinions about root vegetables and property law. When she became careful, it meant the situation had earned it. Do you know who that is? I know the name, Sarah said. Everyone knew the name. Gabriel Draveth was the Blood Alpha of the Iron Veil Pack, the northernmost of the 7 territories, the one that sat at the edge of the known packlands where the mountains turned black and the winters lasted 8 months and the trees grew twisted by the wind into shapes that looked, in certain lights, like they were trying to escape. The Iron Veil Pack was not large. It had never been large. But size, in the hierarchy of pack power, was the least interesting variable. Iron Veil was feared for reasons that had nothing to do with numbers. It was feared because of what it had survived. 12 years ago, the Iron Veil Pack had been one of 7 targets in the culling. A coordinated attack by a coalition of rogue packs who had decided that the Northern Territories' independence was a threat to their expanding trade routes. The culling had lasted 3 weeks and had been, by most accounts that Sarah had ever encountered, a systematic annihilation. 6 of the 7 targeted packs had been absorbed, scattered, or simply erased. Iron Veil had not. Iron Veil had survived because of a 17-year-old alpha heir named Gabriel Draveth, who had apparently done things during those 3 weeks that people still didn't fully describe in direct sentences. They spoke around it. They used the language of aftermath, what was left of the attacking force, and the borders that were never challenged again. The peace that settled over the Northern Territories so completely that it felt less like peace and more like the particular silence of things that have learned not to approach a certain place. He had been Blood Alpha in his own right since he was 19. He had attended no mating ceremonies in the intervening years, not in his own territory, not in any of the 6 allied packs. The standing assumption, spoken quietly, was that the moon had simply not matched him yet. The less charitable interpretation, spoken more quietly still, was that no Omega with functional self-preservation instincts would willingly bond with a man whose name made rooms go silent. And this man, this specific, terrible, legend-wrapped man, had stood at the edge of the Veyrath Pack's mating ceremony 3 days ago, and had watched Sarah stumble on a paving stone, and had apparently found this interesting enough to ask questions about. He's the Blood Alpha of Iron Veil, Delphine said, unnecessarily, because Sarah knew this. But Delphine was processing the information through speech the way some people processed it through pacing. He doesn't come to ceremonies. He hasn't come to one in years. The last time Iron Veil had any formal diplomatic contact with Veyrath was Delphine. Sarah set down the dead herb stems she was holding. Did Elder Marin's attendant say anything else? Was there more to the message? Delphine pressed her lips together in the specific way she had when she was deciding how much of a thing to say. Marin has requested your presence at the Elder Hall tomorrow morning. Sarah looked at her hands, dirt under the nails, and a small scratch from the dead rosemary she'd been pulling. Ordinary hands, the hands of a girl who had been stood in 5 mating ceremonies and been chosen by no one. All right, she said. All right, Delphine repeated, with the emphasis of someone who found this response insufficient. All right, Sarah, do you understand what? I understand what his name means, Sarah said quietly. I also understand that Elder Marin has summoned me, and that refusing a summons from the Elder Hall would create more problems than it solves. And I understand. She paused, pulled one more stem from the herb bed with the decisive grip of a person organizing her own thoughts through action. That I don't actually know anything yet. I know a name. I know someone asked a question, as everything else is other people's interpretation of what that means. Delphine stared at her for a long moment. Then she exhaled through her nose, a sound that managed to convey both exasperation and something that might have been respect. Your grandmother, she said, used to drive me absolutely insane in exactly the same way. She told her mother that evening. There was no version of not telling her. Hilda's network of social information in the Veyrath Pack was comprehensive and involuntary, built over 30 years of being a warm, interested, deeply present member of the community. She would hear it by morning, if not by tonight, and hearing it from someone other than Sarah would be worse. She found her mother in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with the rhythmic focus that Hilda used the way other people used meditation. She sat down at the table. She told her plainly what Delphine had told her. Name, question, summons. Hilda's hands stopped moving in the dough. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Not the gray, familiar silence of 5 ceremonies worth of quiet disappointment, but something Sarah couldn't immediately place. When her mother turned around, Sarah saw that her expression was complicated in a way she hadn't anticipated. Not joy, not the desperate, held-breath hope she'd worn to every ceremony. Something more conflicted than hope. Gavriel Draveth, Hilda said, and the name in her mouth had weight. You know who he is, Sarah said. It wasn't quite a question. Every mother in the 7 territories knows who he is. Hilda wiped her hands on her apron with slow, deliberate movements. Sarah, what happened at the ceremony? Did you speak with him? For approximately 45 seconds. Sarah folded her hands on the table. He was standing near the edge of the floor. I stumbled. She paused. Because what had he done, exactly? He had stated a fact. He had agreed with her. He had looked at her like she surprised him, and somehow that had been more disturbing than pity or cruelty or any of the things she was practiced at navigating. He said something kind, or at least, not unkind. And then I left. Hilda was quiet for a moment. Did you feel anything? A pull or... No. Sarah said it gently but clearly. Not the bond. Nothing like that. Hilda nodded slowly. She came to the table and sat down across from her daughter, and for a moment she just looked at her, with the particular, a layered look of a mother who has spent 22 years watching a person she loves navigate a world that has not been consistently kind to them. I need you to be careful, she said finally. I'm always careful. I mean, with this specifically, with whatever is happening here. Hilda's hands found Sarah's across the table. Powerful men who ask questions about unremarkable girls don't always have beautiful reasons for it. unremarkable. The word landed without malice. Her mother used it the way a doctor names a symptom clinically because accuracy was more useful than comfort. But Sarah felt it anyway, filed it away in the place she kept things that were true and useful and didn't require a reaction. "I know," she said. "You'll go to Marin tomorrow." "Yes. And you'll tell me everything." "I always do." Hilda squeezed her hands once, firmly, the way she had when Sarah was small and frightened of thunder. The physical shorthand for "I am here. This will pass. You are not alone." Then she released them, stood, and returned to her bread dough with the decisive energy of a woman who processed fear through productivity. Sarah sat at the table a while longer, listening to the kitchen sounds and the wind outside, and thought about dark green eyes and the word severe, and the specific look of a man who has seen enough of the world to no longer bother being surprised by most of it, but had been, for one suspended moment, surprised by her. The Elder Hall of the Veyrath Pack was the oldest building in the territory, predating the current Alpha's estate by 2 centuries, built from the same black stone as the original settlement, its walls thick enough to hold the cold out in winter and the heat in during summer with equal indifference. The great iron doors were never locked. Elder Marin had once said that a council whose doors needed locking had already lost something more important than security. Sarah arrived on time, because she was always on time, because unpunctuality gave people things to say about you that had nothing to do with the actual matter at hand. She was shown into the inner council chamber, a room she'd been in twice before, both times for a routine pack business, and found Elder Marin already seated at the head of the long table. 2 council members flanked her. Elder Roth, the pack's territorial advisor, a compact gray-haired man with very small eyes, and Elder Seifa, who handled inter-pack diplomacy and whose expression could transition between warm and absolutely unreadable in the time it took to blink. And at the far end of the table, standing rather than sitting, because apparently he stood the way other people breathed, automatically, without particular attention to the preferences of the room around him, was Gavriel Draveth. He looked, in daylight, and in the enclosed space of the council chamber, more solid than memory had rendered him. The severity she'd registered at the ceremony was not, she found, a trick of torchlight. It was structural. It was the way his shoulders carried their width. Not performed, not postured, but settled, like weight that had been there so long it had become load-bearing. He was still dressed without embellishment, but in the context of the Elder Hall's ceremony and stone, his plainness read as a different kind of statement. "I don't need decoration to be legible." His eyes found her the moment she entered the room, dark green, winter water depth. The same not quite surprise that she had catalogued at the ceremony, present again now, as if he was testing a hypothesis and finding it confirmed. "Sarah of the Veyrath Pack," Elder Marin said, with the precise formality of someone managing a situation they hadn't fully decided how they felt about. "Please sit." Sarah sat. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at Marin, then at the council members. Then, because it would have been stranger not to, at the Blood Alpha of the Iron Veil Pack, who was now lowering himself into the chair at the far end of the table with the unhurried gravity of a man who had never rushed anything in his life. "I'll speak plainly," Marin said, which meant the situation was more complex than plain speaking could fully accommodate. "Alpha Draveth has attended our ceremony as part of a diplomatic survey of the Southern Territories. He has expressed an interest in making a formal inquiry regarding you." Sarah processed this. "What kind of inquiry?" "A mating inquiry," Elder Seifa said, with the careful neutrality of a diplomat, stepping carefully across uncertain ground. He has asked permission to speak with you directly, privately, before any formal proposal is made. Sarah looked at Gabriel Draveth. But he was looking back at her with exactly the same expression he'd had during their 45-second conversation at the edge of the ceremonial floor. Level, measuring, without the performance of desire or the false warmth of someone who needed her to already be comfortable. He looked like a man presenting himself accurately and waiting to see if that was enough. "All right," Sarah said. Maren blinked. A fractional thing, but Sarah caught it. "You don't need to decide immediately. You have the right to—" "I understand my rights," Sarah said, not unkindly. "I'd like to speak with him." The council members exchanged the kind of glance that carried a full conversation in it. Then Maren inclined her head, the minimal, dignified motion of someone accepting an outcome they hadn't fully prepared for, and stood, gesturing to the council members. We'll be just outside," she said. The implicit message, "Don't think for a moment that just outside means we won't hear you," went unsaid, as it didn't need saying. The door closed. The room held its breath. Across the length of the long council table, Gabriel Draveth looked at Sarah, and Sarah looked at Gabriel Draveth, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the particular kind of silence that exists between two people who have independently decided not to fill space with noise for the sake of filling it. "You didn't look afraid," he said finally, "when they said my name." "Should I have been?" she asked. He considered this with the same methodical attention he appeared to give everything. "Most people are." "Most people," Sarah said carefully, "know your name from stories. I know it from stories too. But you're sitting across a council table from me in a packed elder hall in broad daylight with 3 elders 12 feet away. The context mitigates somewhat." That small interior thing happened in his expression again. The thing that wasn't quite a smile. "You argue with yourself while you talk," he said. "I can hear you working through it." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not the bond, not warmth exactly, but the specific, rare sensation of being seen accurately by someone who hadn't been given permission to look that closely. She wasn't sure yet whether she found it welcome or alarming. "You asked who I was," she said. "After the ceremony. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because you left the ceremonial floor with your chin level. And after standing there unclaimed for 40 minutes while women 10 feet away said things about you that would have made most people either cry or retaliate." He paused. "And you didn't do either." "I went home and pulled dead herbs out of the garden," Sarah said. "I know," he said. "That's why I asked." The silence that followed this was different from the first one. Heavier, more specific, freighted with the weight of being known by the exact detail you thought was invisible. "What is it you actually want?" Sarah asked, because she had 5 ceremonies worth of calibration against false hope, and she was not going to sit in this room and let a story build itself around her without asking the question directly. Gabriel Draveth looked at her for a long moment. "I want to make you a proposition," he said. "And I want you to hear the whole of it before you answer." Outside, the wind moved through the black stone walls. The candles on the council table did not flicker. Sarah looked at the most dangerous alpha in 7 territories and said, "Then talk." Chapter 3. The Proposition. He did not lean forward when he spoke. Sarah noticed this because most people did. Most people, when they were about to say something they needed you to receive a certain way, physically oriented themselves toward you, closed the distance, used proximity as a kind of persuasion. It was instinctive. It was human. It was the body's way of saying, "Please." Gabriel Draveth did not do this. He sat back in his chair with his forearms resting on the table, hands loosely folded, and spoke to her across the length of the council table as if the distance were irrelevant, as if the quality of what he said would carry on its own merits or not at all. She found, against all reasonable expectation, that she respected this. "Ironvale has a problem," he said. "Most packs do," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Ours is specific. There is a summit, a formal gathering of the 7-pack alphas, convening in 6 weeks at the Greyvale Neutral Grounds. It is the first such summit in 11 years. The agenda is territorial boundary renewal, trade route agreements, and the formal recognition of pack succession lines." Sarah listened. She was good at listening, had learned young that listening was information, and information was the only reliable advantage available to people who started with no others. "Ironvale's succession line is disputed," Gabriel continued. "Specifically, my right to hold the Blood Alpha title without a bonded mate is being challenged by 2 of the southern packs, Hartwell and Duskmere, who have inserted language into the proposed summit charter requiring that any alpha presenting territorial claims must do so as a bonded pair. The argument being that an unbonded alpha cannot speak for the long-term stability of a pack. "That's a political maneuver," Sarah said, "not a genuine succession concern." He looked at her with a precision that suggested he was recalibrating something. "Yes. Hartwell and Duskmere want your northern trade routes," she said. It wasn't a guess. It was the logical conclusion of the information he'd provided. As obvious as arithmetic once you had the right numbers. Oh, if they can delegitimize your claim at the summit without a military challenge, which would cost them significantly, they get the boundary concessions through procedure instead of force. Cleaner, deniable. The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long. "Yes," he said again, and this time the word had a different texture. Not confirmation of something she'd guessed correctly, but something closer to the sound of a door opening. "So you need a bonded mate," Sarah said. "By the summit." "I need to appear bonded," he said, and the distinction was careful and deliberate. The charter language specifies presented as a bonded pair. It does not, and my legal counsel has examined it extensively, require verification of the bond's authenticity. It requires presentation, appearance, a credible claim. Sarah was quiet for a moment, turning this over. "You want someone to stand beside you at the summit and appear to be your mate," she said. "Someone convincing enough that Hartwell and Duskmere can't formally challenge the claim without evidence, and finding evidence would require a level of invasiveness that would itself become a diplomatic incident." "Correct. And you want that person to be me?" "Yes." "Why me?" The question came out level, but underneath it were 5 layers of things she wasn't saying. Why not someone from your own pack? Why not someone who makes more obvious political sense? Why not someone whose name doesn't make council elders look at each other like a problem to be solved? She compressed all of it into 2 words and waited. And Gabrielle was quiet for a moment in the particular way she was already beginning to recognize. Not the silence of someone searching for words, but someone deciding how precisely to use the ones they'd already chosen. "Because I have been to 3-pack gatherings in the last 2 years, looking for someone I could ask this of," he said. "And the answer to the question is not, as you might assume, that I needed someone desperate enough to accept. The answer is that I needed someone I could trust with the full reality of what I was asking. Someone who wouldn't mistake the arrangement for something it isn't. Someone who could walk into a room full of territorial alphas and their bonded mates and hold a conversation without revealing, through nerves, through performance, through the particular transparency of people who are pretending to feel something they don't, that the bond wasn't genuine. He paused. At the ceremony, you walked across a space where everyone was watching you with pity or amusement, and you held your expression with the absolute steadiness of someone who had practiced being looked at and made peace with what looking cost you. You argued with yourself in real time and still arrived at clarity. And when I said something that surprised you, you didn't perform surprise. You just looked at me and processed it and answered honestly. Sarah stared at him. You assessed all of that, she said slowly, in 45 seconds. I've been reading rooms since I was 17, he said. It's either a skill or a symptom. I've never been sure which. Another silence. Outside, and she could hear the muted movement of the council members, the small, restrained sounds of 3 people trying very hard to pretend they weren't listening through a door. What would it involve? Sarah asked. Because she was her grandmother's granddaughter and Delphine's niece and her mother's daughter, and all 3 of those women had taught her, in different registers with different vocabularies, that the shape of a thing mattered more than your first feeling about it. 6 weeks of preparation, he said. You would come to Ironvale. You would learn the pack, its people, its history, its political landscape. You would learn enough about me to answer questions convincingly. At the summit, you would stand beside me for 4 days, present as my bonded mate, attend the formal dinners, the council sessions, the public ceremonies. He paused. After the summit, the arrangement ends. You return to Veyrath. I provide, in exchange, a formal letter of introduction to any pack of your choosing, a significant financial settlement to your family, and, if it is relevant to you, a testimony to whatever future mate might require reassurance that the appearance of a bond between us was precisely that. An appearance. The offer hung in the air between them, organized and precise, every variable accounted for, every exit clearly marked. It was, Sarah thought, the most scrupulously honest proposition she had ever received. It was also, she thought, the most dangerous. You understand, she said carefully, what this would mean for my reputation here, when if it became known, and things tend to become known, that I had presented as a bonded mate to the blood alpha of Ironvale and the presentation was false. The social consequences in my own pack would be significant, he said. Yes, I've considered that. Have you? Which is why the settlement includes property, he said. A house in the Veyrath Southern Quarter, in your name, that would provide you financial independence regardless of social standing. And why the arrangement, if it is ever discovered and questioned, has a cover narrative, that the bond was genuine but dissolved by mutual agreement after the summit, which is rare but not unheard of in the case of newly formed bonds under extreme pressure. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. You've thought about this very carefully, she said. I think about everything very carefully, he said. Is that a character strength or a symptom? Something shifted in his face. And this time it was more than the interior almost smile. It was brief and quickly controlled, but it was there, the specific expression of a man who has been surprised into genuine amusement and is mildly annoyed with himself for it. Jury's still out, he said. She asked him 3 more questions before she asked for time. The first, had he told his own pack what he was doing? My inner circle knows. My beta, Aldrich, has been aware of the plan since its conception. The pack at large will be told that I've entered a courtship with a Veyrath Omega, which is consistent with what will be publicly visible. While the second, what happened if the summit went badly? If Hartwell or Duskmere challenged the bond's authenticity despite the appearance they presented, we respond as a bonded pair responds to having their bond questioned, with unified offense, not defensive explanation. A bonded pair who calmly and collectively rejects the premise of the question is more convincing than any documentation. The third, and this one she asked more quietly, because it was the question beneath all the other questions, the one that had been sitting under everything since he first said her name. Why haven't you sought a real bond, an actual mate? The silence this produced was different from the others. Not calculating, not strategic. Something raw moved through it, all quickly covered, the particular movement of a person closing a door they'd left accidentally open. That, he said after a moment, is not relevant to the current arrangement, which was, Sarah thought, a very specific kind of answer. She asked for 24 hours. He gave it without hesitation, which she noted. People who haggle with time are people who aren't confident in what they're offering. He stood when she stood, which was old-fashioned and not required, and watched her cross to the door with the same level, measuring attention. She paused with her hand on the door handle. "If I say yes," she said, without turning around, "I need one condition that isn't in your current terms." "Name it." "I won't perform," she said. "I will be convincing. Well, because I am capable of being convincing when I understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. But I won't pretend to feel things I don't feel. And I won't be told how to stand or where to look or what to say in a way that treats me like a prop you're arranging. If I'm going to do this, I do it as myself. Adapted, informed, prepared, but myself." The pause behind her was exactly long enough for her to wonder if she'd miscalculated. "Agreed," he said. She opened the door. The 3 council members, who had absolutely not been listening at the door, were standing at a perfectly natural distance down the corridor with the very relaxed postures of people doing nothing of note. Elder Marin looked at Sarah with an expression that contained approximately 14 questions. "I'll let you know tomorrow," Sarah said. And she walked home through the Veyrath market quarter because she needed the movement, needed the specific physical grammar of walking through familiar spaces to help her think. The market was mid-morning busy. The bread stalls, the herb vendors, the ironwork tables where Aldrin the blacksmith always had 3 things cooling and 3 more in the fire. She passed all of it with the automatic navigation of someone who had walked this route since childhood, letting it ground her while the rest of her worked. He was right that she could do it. That was the thing she kept returning to. Not the fear of it, not the social risk, not the complicated logistics of 6 weeks in a foreign pack learning to perform an intimacy she didn't possess. Those things were present, carefully noted, assigned their appropriate weight. But underneath them, as stubborn and clear, was the simple fact that he had assessed her correctly. She could do this. She had spent 5 years learning to hold her expression steady in rooms that found her wanting. She had spent 22 years learning to read people, to notice what they revealed in the space between their words, to catalog the small tells that separated genuine from performed. She had spent her entire life being invisible in ways that had felt like punishment, and now, examined from a specific angle, looked like preparation. She could walk into a room of territorial alphas and their bonded mates and hold the line. She knew she could. The knowledge sat in her chest with the quiet root system solidity of a thing that has always been true. The question was whether she should. She passed Petra's family shop, closed today. Al shuddered, and remembered the sound of 5 ceremonies spoken with the effortless contempt of someone who had never needed to imagine anything painful. She remembered her mother's face at the edge of the ceremonial courtyard, maintaining that held, desperate brightness for 40 minutes. She remembered the pale blue dress, 3 weeks of stitches, the love sewn into fabric. She thought about the house in the southern quarter that he'd mentioned, in her name. Financial independence regardless of social standing. She thought about her mother not having to come to a 6th ceremony. She thought about a man who had read her in 45 seconds with more accuracy than anyone had managed in 22 years, and had then, instead of using that information to diminish her, used it to argue that she was precisely the right person for something difficult. She arrived home. Her mother was in the garden this time, doing the same thing Sarah had been doing yesterday, tending the herb beds, hands busy, mind working. She looked up when Sarah came through the gate and read her daughter's face with the comprehensive fluency of a woman who had been translating this specific person for 22 years. "You're going to say yes," Hilda said. It wasn't quite a question. "I haven't decided yet," Sarah said. Hilda looked at her for a long moment, with that complicated, layered expression she'd had last night. Not hope, not fear, but something in between. Then she turned back to her herbs. "Your grandmother," she said quietly. "Mom always said that the opportunities worth taking are the ones that scare you in the right places." Sarah stood in the garden gate and thought about dark green eyes and 6 weeks in a foreign pack, and the word agreed spoken without hesitation. "What are the right places?" she asked, and her mother was quiet for a moment. "The places where the fear isn't about what you might lose," Hilda said, "but about whether you're big enough for what you might become." The wind moved through the herb beds. The dead growth and the living moved together in it, indistinguishable from this distance. Sarah stayed in the gate until she knew her answer. She sent word to the elder hall before sundown. The message was 3 sentences. "I accept the terms with the conditions stated. I will be ready to travel within the week." Tell him I said, "Don't make me regret the accuracy of your assessment." She didn't know until much later. Until the kind of later that exists on the other side of everything. That when Aldrich, Gavriel's beta, read the message aloud to him that evening in the Iron Veil Envoy's temporary quarters at the Veyrath Inn, the blood alpha of the Iron Veil pack had read it twice, and smiled. Not the interior, almost smile she had already catalogued, something fuller than that, something that Aldrich, who had known him for 15 years, would later describe as the specific expression of a man who has been alone for a very long time and has just, unexpectedly, heard a sound that makes him remember what company felt like. But that was later. For now, there was only the sending of the message and the sitting in the garden after dark, and in the pale blue dress folded on the chair in her room, which she looked at when she came in from the cold, and then, with the decisive calm of someone closing one chapter and opening another, carefully folded away. She wouldn't need pale for where she was going. Sarah had 5 years of empty ceremonies and still chose the harder, braver path when it mattered. If you're the kind of person who believes that the ones who keep showing up, quietly, without applause, deserve to finally win, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe if you haven't yet. We tell stories for people who recognize that kind of strength. Chapter 4. Iron Veil. The journey north took 4 days. Sarah had never traveled beyond the Veyrath territory boundaries. She knew this about herself the way you know the dimensions of a room you've lived in your whole life. Not as a limitation you've examined closely, but as a simple fact of the walls around you. The world beyond Veyrath had always existed as information rather than experience. Maps in the Elder Hall, trade route records, the second-hand accounts of merchants who came through in autumn with goods from the northern territories, and stories that got more elaborate the more wine was involved. She had packed practically, one trunk, organized with the methodical precision she applied to things she could control when the larger situation was beyond it. 3 changes of practical clothing, and 2 formal dresses, the better of the 2 borrowed from her Aunt Delphine, who had insisted on this with the focused determination of a woman outfitting a soldier. Her grandmother's journal, which she had carried since she was 16, because it was the closest thing she had to a manual for navigating the world without the usual advantages. A small knife, because Delphine had also insisted on this, and Sarah had not disagreed. The Iron Veil escort had arrived the morning of her departure. 4 riders in dark clothes with the Iron Veil pack insignia on their collars. A stylized mountain peak crossed by what looked like a lightning strike, but was actually, she'd learned from the elder records she'd spent the 2 days before departure reading, the mark of the Old Blood Compact, and a territorial agreement that predated the current pack structure by a century. The lead rider was a woman named Voss, compact, weather-worn, with the economical manner of someone who communicated only when the situation absolutely required it. Gabriel was not among them. She had not expected him to be, and told herself the absence was neither surprising nor notable. The goodbye with her mother had been the hardest part, not because Hilda broke down. She didn't, which was somehow worse. She stood in the doorway of their house in the early morning chill, wearing her kitchen apron over her good wool dress because she had been cooking since before dawn, and she held Sarah's face in both hands and looked at her with the full, unguarded love of a woman who had decided she was done trying to find words adequate to it. 6 weeks, Sarah said. 6 weeks, Hilda agreed. Then, write to me, every chance I get, and eat. Her mother's hands tightened briefly on her jaw. I know what you're like when you're thinking hard about something. You forget to eat. I won't forget. You will. I packed food in the saddlebag. The left one. Don't let them throw it out. Sarah had laughed, genuinely, from somewhere that didn't have a performance in it. And Hilda had pulled her close for a single, fierce embrace that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and ended with the decisive release of a woman who had decided not to make leaving harder than it had to be. Delphine had not come to see her off. She had come the night before, sat at the kitchen table, and delivered a 40-minute comprehensive briefing on Iron Veil pack politics, Gabriel Draveth's known history, and the social customs of Northern pack gatherings that Sarah should be aware of. It was the most loving thing Delphine had ever done for her, expressed in the only language Delphine reliably spoke. At the end of it, she had pressed a small sealed letter into Sarah's hand. If you need to leave, she said, and you can't say so directly, send this back with any messenger. I'll come. Delphine, I know you won't need to use it, Delphine said, with the absolute no-argument certainty she applied to things she had decided to believe. But you'll be calmer knowing it exists. She had been right. Sarah had the letter in her pocket, and she was calmer for it. The landscape changed as they traveled north. Not suddenly, not with the dramatic, symbolic shift of a story where the world transforms to match the moment. Then it changed the way all real things changed. Gradually, incrementally, each day's scenery a little different from the last until you looked back and couldn't identify the exact mile where one territory had become another. The southern Veyrath land was agricultural. Rolling fields, managed forest, the tidy, productive beauty of land that had been worked for generations. As they traveled, the fields gave way to older, denser forest. The trees grew larger and further apart, the canopy higher, the undergrowth darker and more various. On the 3rd day, the road began to climb, and the mountains that had been a smudge on the northern horizon resolved into actual geography, present, enormous, indifferent to the scale of anything approaching them. Sarah spent the riding hours watching and cataloging, at the way she always spent time in new situations. She learned the escorts' names. Voss, the lead. a quiet young male called Pren who rode drag and watched the tree line with the focused attention of someone who had been trained to expect something from it. Two others, Dara and Fen, who were apparently bonded to each other and communicated largely through the specific efficiency of people who have shared a language for long enough that words are optional. She learned that Iron Veil riders did not stop for comfort breaks. They stopped when the horses needed it, and the riders adapted. She learned that they ate in the saddle, and that the food her mother had packed, dense oat bread, hard cheese, dried fruit folded in cloth, was both more abundant and more delicious than the standard trail rations the escort produced from their own packs, as which caused Voss to look at Sarah's saddlebag on the second day with the expression of someone revising an assumption. She learned that Voss, despite the economical manner, would answer direct questions with direct answers, which was the conversational style Sarah strongly preferred. "What should I know?" Sarah asked on the third morning, while they climbed the first real mountain pass. "About the pack? That I wouldn't find in the Elder Hall records." Voss considered this for the length of several switchback turns. "The pack is loyal," she said finally. "Not to the title, to him specifically. That's different." "How so?" "A pack loyal to a title follows the rules of the title. A pack loyal to a person follows the person." She paused. "Means they'll accept whatever he brings home if they trust he brought it for the right reasons. S means they'll also know immediately if something's wrong because they've learned to read him." Sarah absorbed this. "And Aldrich? The beta?" Voss's expression shifted in a way that was subtle and comprehensive. "Aldrich has been with Gavriel since the culling, since he was 17. You should know." She paused again, in the specific way of someone deciding how much of a true thing to say. "Aldrich has opinions. He'll be polite. But he has opinions." "About me?" "About the arrangement." She glanced sideways at Sarah. "He's not wrong to have them. But they're his opinions to work through, not yours to manage." "Understood," Sarah said, and filed this alongside everything else. Iron Veil announced itself before it was visible. The air changed first, colder, sharper, carrying a resinous green smell that was the dense pine forests of the upper slopes, releasing something into the atmosphere that the lower forests didn't. Then the light changed. The way the snow on the upper peaks caught the late afternoon sun and threw it back down in a diffuse silver-white wash that made everything at ground level look slightly more real than usual. The way things look when there's more light than shadow, and neither is quite winning. Then, the gate. It was not the gate she'd expected. She'd been imagining something dramatic. The imposing, intentionally intimidating architecture of a pack that wanted to project strength at its threshold. But what she found instead was something older and less theatrical. Two enormous pines that had grown close enough together over centuries that their trunks had partially merged at the base, forming a natural arch over the pack road that no one had designed and no one could have manufactured. Between their roots, carved into the stone of the road itself, was the Iron Veil mark, mountain peak crossed by the old blood compact lightning, worn smooth by years of passage to the point where you had to know what you were looking for to see it. "No one told me it looked like this," Sarah said, without meaning to. Voss glanced at her. Most people expect something more." "It's better than more." The corner of Voss's mouth moved in what Sarah was becoming able to identify as the Iron Veil equivalent of a warm smile, smaller and less decorated than what she was used to, but no less genuine. "Don't tell the Alpha that. He'll never hear the end of it." Gavriel met her at the main hall, not at the gate. She registered this, the deliberate choice of where to position the welcome, which in pack protocol carried meaning. Meeting at the gate was possessive, claiming, "It said, 'This is my territory. I receive you at its edge.'" Meeting at the main hall was different. It said you've crossed the distance yourself. Now we meet as people within a shared space. He was standing on the hall's front steps when the escort rode in, and he looked. She noted with the cataloging precision she applied to everything, exactly the same as he had in the Elder Hall of Veyrath, which was to say, settled. No performance of casual welcome. No particular configuration of expression designed to put her at ease. Just the same level attention he had given her across the council table. Now outdoors. Now with the enormous backdrop of the Iron Vale Mountains framing him in a way that should have been dramatic and somehow wasn't because he didn't need it. She dismounted. Voss took her horse. For a moment, she and Gavriel stood at the base of the steps and the top of the steps respectively, the height difference meaning she was looking up at him, which she noted, and then catalogued as irrelevant, because she had spent her whole life at the bottom of various hierarchies and had long since stopped letting the geometry of them determine her posture. "You made good time," he said. "Voss sets a good pace." He came down the steps, not quickly, but directly, with purpose, and stopped a proper distance away. Social distance, not territorial, not intimate. She registered this too. "Welcome to Ironvale," he said, and unlike Elder Marin's formal welcome, unlike the official language of pack reception that she'd heard at every ceremony she'd ever attended, this was plain, direct, the same register as everything else he said. Here is a true thing. "Thank you," she said, with the same register, received. "There's a room prepared. Dinner with the inner circle tonight. Aldrich will be there, and 3 others you'll need to know. Tomorrow we begins the actual work." "What does the actual work look like?" "Today you rest and observe. Tomorrow I take you through the pack. The people, the territory, the political context you'll need for the summit. We have 6 weeks, which is adequate if we use them well and insufficient if we don't." "Then we'll use them well," she said. He looked at her for a moment. That measuring look she was accumulating a small library of, and then something shifted in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the almost smile. Something more deliberate than that. He extended one hand, not to shake, but palm up. An older gesture, a pack gesture, the gesture of one wolf presenting their open hand to another as an indication of non-threat and invitation both. It was, in its way, the most formal thing he'd done. She placed her hand in his, briefly, the way the gesture required. His hand was warm. The contact lasted exactly as long as the protocol demanded, and she stepped back when it was over and was absolutely certain that the awareness she felt was ambient, environmental, the altitude change and the cold air and the disorientation of being somewhere new. Absolutely certain. A young woman appeared at the door of the main hall. 18 or 19, small and quick, with short dark hair and the kind of perpetual forward momentum that some people are born with and never quite manage to slow down. "That's Nira," Gavriel said. "She'll show you to your room and answer questions I've forgotten to anticipate." Nira, who had apparently heard this, grinned with the unguarded brightness of someone who found her position in life genuinely enjoyable. He forgets a lot of things ordinary people want to know," she confirmed, apparently without any concern for whether this was a thing she should say in front of him. "I keep a running list. Come on, the room has a fire going already, and there's hot water if you want it." Sarah followed her toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. Gavriel was still standing at the base of the steps, watching her cross the space with the same attention he'd given everything else. When she caught his eye, he did not look away. He held it, steady and uncomplicated, for exactly 1 second. Then he turned and walked away, and she turned and walked in. and the door closed behind her. Dinner that evening was in a small room off the main hall, not the formal dining room, all which she'd passed on the way to her quarters and clocked as large enough to require ceremony. This was a side room with a low ceiling and a fire and a table that sat 8 comfortably and didn't attempt to be anything more than what it was. She arrived to find 4 people already there. Aldrich was immediately identifiable, not because she'd been told what he looked like. She hadn't. But because he had the specific bearing of someone whose relationship to the person they protected is so long established that it has become architectural. He was Gavriel's age, perhaps a year older, with a broad, honest face and light brown eyes that were, at this precise moment, performing a thorough and not particularly subtle assessment of her. He was not unfriendly. He was also not, as Voss had predicted, fully at ease. And she met his assessment with the steady, unhurried openness she used when she wanted people to see that she wasn't hiding and didn't need to. After a moment, some of the tension in his shoulders settled. Not gone, not fully, but reorganized. She filed this as progress. The others, a woman named Taya, the pack's healer, with the specific calm of someone whose profession required them to be the steadiest person in a room that was otherwise in chaos. A male named Oren, territorial advisor, young for the role, who looked at everything with the bright attentiveness of someone who has learned that information arrives faster through watching than asking, and Voss, who had apparently transitioned from escort lead to dinner guest with a minimum of ceremony and was already serving herself from the bread with the proprietary ease of someone at home. Old Gavriel arrived last, which she would later learn was habitual. He was always the last into a room, not from arrogance, but because he spent the transition time between places doing something internal and necessary that she couldn't name yet, but would eventually learn to recognize. He sat. The food arrived. Simple, northern, substantial. A braised meat that she didn't recognize but immediately liked, root vegetables roasted dark, bread that was denser and darker than Veyrath bread, and better for it. The conversation began in the way conversations begin when there's a stranger at the table and everyone is deciding how much to be themselves. So, Aldrich said, with the directness of a man who had apparently decided to skip the transitional small talk entirely. Tell us something true about yourself. Aldrich, Taya said. Oh, it's a fair question, he said, without particular apology. We're going to spend 6 weeks preparing to stand beside her at the most politically complicated summit Ironvale has attended in a decade. I'd rather know who she actually is now than learn it under pressure. There was a beat of silence. Sarah looked at Aldrich, at the honest, guarded concern behind the directness. Not hostility, she reassessed, but the protective worry of someone who had watched Gavriel carry something alone for a long time, and was not certain this was the right way to set it down. Something true, she said. All right. She thought for a moment. With the real, unhurried consideration, she gave questions that deserved it. I've attended 5 mating ceremonies and been claimed by no one. I could spend time being ashamed of this. It is, in my pack, I considered a significant social deficiency. I have chosen instead to understand it as 5 years of uninterrupted practice being in a room full of people who found me wanting and maintaining my own sense of what I'm worth, independent of their assessment. She paused. That practice is precisely why your alpha asked me here. So I have chosen to regard it as preparation rather than failure. That is something true. Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached over, picked up the bread basket, and set it in front of her. Have some bread, he said. You look like you haven't eaten since Veyrath. My mother packed oat bread for the journey, she said. We finished it on day 2. Your mother sounds smart, Taya said. She's the smartest person I know, Sarah said. Don't tell her I said that. It will only encourage her. Something shifted in the room then. The specific atmospheric change that happens when a group of people who have been in a cautious configuration simultaneously decide, in their individual ways, that caution is no longer the mode required. Not warmth, exactly. Not yet. But the precondition for it. The opening of a door that everyone is standing near and no one has walked through yet. Across the table, she felt Gabriel watching this happen with the particular attention of someone who has been waiting to see the result of an experiment they've designed with care. Their eyes met briefly. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she turned back to Aldrich and said, "All right, tell me something true about yourselves. We have 6 weeks, and I'd rather know who you actually are now than learn it under pressure." Oren laughed, an involuntary, genuine sound. And then, one by one, around a table in a room with a low ceiling and a generous fire, the people of the Iron Veil inner circle began to talk. Chapter 5. What practice looks like. The first week was education. Not the formal, structured kind. Not lessons in a room with a table and a designated teacher and information delivered in prescribed sequence. It was the kind of education that happens when you are dropped into the middle of a living thing and told, by implication and necessity, to learn its rhythms before you try to move within them. Gabriel took her through the pack territory on the second morning, as promised, and she understood immediately that the word "through" was doing significant work in that sentence. They did not take a road. They did not follow the marked paths between the main hall and the settlement clusters that she could see from her window. They went across the territory the way someone walks through their own house in the dark, with the unconscious, a total knowledge of someone who has memorized a space so completely it has become an extension of themselves. He walked, she walked beside him, and he talked. This was, she would come to understand, the rarest version of him, not the council chamber version, measured and strategic, not the dinner table version, present but contained. This was Gabriel Draveth talking about something he loved, and love, even in the most controlled, most armored people, has a way of getting into the voice. Not sentimentality, nothing so soft as that, but a precision that went beyond information, the specific articulation of someone who has studied a thing long enough that they can describe not just what it is, but why it matters. He showed her the northern ridge first, the territory's highest accessible point, in where you could see the full spread of the packland below, the settlement clusters arranged in the natural protected hollows of the mountain's lower slopes, the river that cut through the center carrying snowmelt down toward the valley, the managed forest on the eastern face where the pack's timber and hunting grounds began. He showed her the 3 watchtower positions, older than the current pack structure, repurposed, and explained the sightline calculations that made them still operationally relevant despite their age. "You're showing me the defensive architecture first," she observed. He glanced at her. "Yes. Most people who give territory tours start with the things they're proud of. The market, the hall, the ceremonial spaces. I'm proud of the defensive architecture," he said, all with the straightforward simplicity of someone who has never had reason to be embarrassed about what they value. She thought about 17-year-old Gabriel Draveth defending these ridges during the culling, and said nothing, because there were true things that were better left, as the weight they were rather than spoken into lightness. They moved down through the eastern forest, where she met a timber crew who greeted Gabriel with the unself-conscious familiarity of people who have been working alongside someone for years. Not performing deference, not performing casualness, but the genuine middle register of people whose relationship to authority is comfortable because it has been consistently reciprocal. A man named Bram, who led the crew, just shook her hand with the direct ease of someone who had no category for awkwardness and saw no reason to manufacture any. "Veyrath girl," he said. Not a question, not a judgment, just information being located. "My mate's from the Hartwell border territory. Long way from home takes some settling." "I imagine it does," Sarah said. How long did the settling take? He thought about it. About the time it took her to decide she liked the trees better than the flatlands. He grinned, a broad, uncomplicated expression. "Took her 3 winters. Now she says she couldn't live without the mountain. That's how you know it's worked." She filed this away in the part of her that was always simultaneously learning the information in front of her and the meta-information about what the information meant. By the 3rd day, she understood the pack's internal grammar. Every community has one. The unspoken system of how people orient to each other, what the social currencies are, how status is assigned and expressed and negotiated. In Veyrath, the grammar was relational, who you were connected to, who your family was, how long your lineage had been pack members, how well you maintained your social ties. Standing in Veyrath was a web, and every strand mattered. In Ironvale, the grammar was different. Simpler in some ways, more demanding in others. Here, standing was earned, continuously, visibly, through competence and contribution and the specific kind of loyalty that expressed itself through action rather than allegiance. The pack had been tested in a way that had stripped certain social pretensions down to their foundations, and what had been rebuilt on those foundations was more functional and less decorative than what she was used to. She liked it. She was surprised by how much she liked it. And then, examining the surprise, understood it. This was a place where being good at things mattered more than being connected to good things. A place where the value of a person was denominated in what they could actually do. She could do things. Taya showed her the healing hall, a long, well-stocked room that Taya ran with the organized, comprehensive efficiency of someone who had learned through necessity that organization was the difference between help and harm. They spent 2 hours there while Taya explained the most common injuries and ailments in a mountain pack, the treatment protocols she'd developed, and the things that were different from Southern pack healing practices. Sarah asked questions. Good ones, Taya said, with the specific approval of a person who has encountered enough incurious people to find curiosity genuinely refreshing. Orin walked her through the political landscape of the upcoming summit. The 7 alphas, their histories, their current alignments, the specific leverage points that Hartwell and Duskmere were applying, and the counter-leverage Ironvale had available. She absorbed all of it with the focused retention she'd developed over 22 years of being a person whose primary asset was understanding situations correctly. "You're fast," Orin said, on the 2nd day of these sessions, with the slightly surprised tone of someone recalibrating. "I've had a lot of practice learning things quickly," she said. Slow learning is a luxury. I've mostly needed to be current." He looked at her for a moment. "Gavriel said you were perceptive." "When did he say that?" "When he told us about the arrangement." Orin paused. "He said a number of things about you, actually, more than he usually says about anyone." She filed this too. She was building quite a file. The actual work of preparation began in the 2nd week. They worked together in the mornings. She and Gavriel in the small study off the main hall that was clearly his primary working space and showed it. The room had the organized complexity of a mind that processed a great deal of information and had developed specific systems for managing it. Maps on the east wall, annotated with handwriting she was learning to read. A correspondence in organized stacks that appeared to have a logic she hadn't fully decoded yet. A standing desk in the corner that was covered in things that were actively being worked on, and a sitting table in the center that was clear, reserved apparently for conversations that required full attention. He cleared it entirely when they worked together. She noticed this. They built the story, the details of their apparent courtship, the plausible timeline of how a Veyrath Omega and the Blood Alpha of Ironvale would have met and moved toward bonding. This required both of them to be specific, because vagueness was where deceptions unraveled. Specific details were consistent. Vague ones were variable under pressure. "When did we meet?" she asked, on the first morning, with the practical tone of someone doing inventory. 4 months ago, he said. Ironvale had a trade delegation in Veyrath's southern quarter. You were at the market. What was I buying? He paused, a brief one. Rosemary. You were arguing with the herb vendor about the price. She looked at him. You're remarkably good at inventing details. I'm not inventing them, he said. You were pulling dead rosemary from your garden when Delphine came to tell you about the inquiry. You smelled of it when you walked into the elder hall. I was in the courtyard when you arrived. The specific, slightly disorienting sensation of being observed accurately returned. The same thing she'd felt at the ceremony, at the council table. She steadied herself against it. All right, she said. I was buying rosemary. Ishin you? Stopped to watch someone argue with a vendor without any apparent concern for who was watching, he said. And then looked up and met my eye and didn't flinch. I don't flinch easily. I know, he said. That's what made it interesting. She put this aside, bracketed it firmly, in the place she put things that required examination later when she had privacy and distance, and moved on. How did we progress from the market to courtship? Slowly, he said. Ironvale doesn't move quickly. The Southern Pacts know this. It will be believable. 3 meetings over 4 months. Correspondence between meetings. An escalation in the final month that produced the formal inquiry to Elder Marin. What were the 3 meetings? He outlined them. So she built the details around his framework. The things he wouldn't think to include because they were the textures of ordinary life that men, particularly men who spent most of their lives in extraordinary circumstances, tended to underspecify. What they ate at each meeting, what the weather was, what she had been thinking about before she arrived, the specific state of mind she would have been in. She added these, and he listened, and occasionally said yes or just that. In Ironvale, we would have eaten this or that month. The weather was actually doing this with the factual precision of a man who had been in these places and could verify. It was, and she recognized this clearly, without allowing herself to dwell on it, genuinely enjoyable. The collaborative construction of something, and the back and forth of building a shared reality from 2 different perspectives, each catching what the other missed. It had the specific pleasure of good conversation, which was the pleasure of 2 minds working in the same direction. She had not had a lot of good conversation in her life. She had had polite conversation, an informational conversation, and the particular kind of performed conversation that happened in social situations where everyone was trying to achieve something and the actual talking was incidental to the effort. This was different. She noticed it, allowed herself to note that she noticed it, and continued. The second part of the morning work was physical, not combat, nothing so dramatic. But Gabriel had pointed out, with the same level practicality he applied to everything, that a bonded pair who did not move comfortably in shared physical space would be immediately, if subtly, legible to the alphas and bonded mates at the summit who had years of reading exactly that kind of comfort. What does it look like? He asked, on the morning they began this part. A bonded pair in a formal setting. What are the specific physical markers? She thought about every bonded pair she had observed in 5 years of mating ceremonies and everything that came after. Orientation, she said. They almost always have a slight natural orientation toward each other, even when they're talking to other people. like a default direction of attention. She paused. And contact, not constant, not performative, but a casual, unconscious contact that happens when they're near each other. A hand on the back, standing close, a redirected look that says, I'm aware of you specifically. So we need to practice being in proximity without it being deliberate, he said. Yes, it needs to look like it costs us nothing. He nodded, with the serious attention of someone treating this as the genuine tactical problem it was. Then we practice proximity, in the working sessions, at meals, moving through the pack, without the contact being planned or prompted. This was easier to describe than to execute. The first few days of it were, she privately admitted, the strangest professional experience of her life, not because of Gavriel specifically. He approached the proximity practice with the same methodical, unself-conscious attention he gave everything, which made it less awkward than it could have been. But because she was extremely conscious of it, the way you're conscious of your breathing when someone mentions breathing, and consciousness was precisely the quality that needed to be absent. She found the solution, eventually, in the same place she found most solutions, in the thing she was already doing. She stopped thinking about the proximity and started thinking about the work. When they were in the study, she was working. When they were walking through the pack, she was learning. She let her attention go where it went, to the maps on the wall, to the detail in a piece of correspondence, to the question she was midway through formulating, and found that when she stopped managing her awareness of him, her body settled into the space naturally. He was a steady physical presence, not intrusive. He had the rare spatial awareness of someone who understood the geometry of other people without having to think about it. He didn't crowd. He didn't create unnecessary distance. He occupied his own space completely and left the rest of it available, which made being near him feel, she reluctantly noted, like the physical equivalent of the good conversation. Comfortable in the way that only comes when the other person isn't performing their comfort. On the 8th day, they were reviewing summit protocol documentation at the study table, both leaning over the same map, her pointing out a seating arrangement question she'd found in Oren's notes. When she became aware that at some point in the last several minutes, without planning it, without noting the transition, that she had moved to stand beside him rather than across from him, and her shoulder was approximately 6 inches from his arm, and neither of them had acknowledged this because it hadn't required acknowledgement. She straightened, looked at the map, kept her voice even. The seating at the formal dinner puts Hartwell's Alpha directly across from you, she said. That's not accidental. No, he agreed, looking at the same map. Duskmere will be to his right. They'll want us in their eye line for the entire meal. Then they'll see us at the entire meal, she said. Make sure we give them something worth looking at. Gavriel turned his head slightly, not toward her exactly, but in her general direction, the slight reorientation of someone whose attention has been caught by something in their peripheral vision. You're not nervous, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the observation of someone checking a reading they hadn't expected. Not about that part, she said honestly. What are you nervous about? She considered the question, considered him, the straightforward way he asked it, the complete absence of judgment in the asking. The bond markers, she said. The things that can't be faked with good positioning and prepared answers. The small ones, the way bonded pairs look at each other when they think no one is watching. She paused. We can practice everything else. I don't know how to practice that. He was quiet for a moment. That part, he said, might take care of itself. She looked at him. He was still looking at the map, but the line of his profile had something in it she was still learning to read. the compressed expression of a person who has said a thing more honestly than they intended and has decided not to retract it. She turned back to the map. The dinner seating, she said, also puts us adjacent to the beta couples of both Hartwell and Duskmere. We should know their names and one useful detail about each of them. It gives us something to work with if we need to redirect a conversation. Oren has the files, he said. Back to level, back to practical. I'll read them tonight. The days found their rhythm. Mornings in the study, middays moving through the pack, evenings at dinner, the inner circle, or sometimes just the two of them when the others had obligations. And she found that she did not mind those evenings, and the ones where it was just the low-ceiling dining room and the fire and food that was better than she'd expected the North to produce. He asked her questions in the evenings, when the day's formal work was done, not the preparation questions, not the story-building inventory. Different questions. What had she studied? Everything the elder hall had available. And then her grandmother's journals, which were better. What had she wanted? Before the ceremonies made wanting things complicated. She'd wanted to travel. She'd wanted to understand pack politics at a level that went beyond what her own territory could show her. She paused there, finding the true thing beneath the comfortable answers. She'd wanted to be useful somewhere, in a way that was proportionate to what she could actually do. But he listened to all of it with the attention he gave everything, complete, unhurried, requiring nothing from her except accuracy. On the 13th night, she asked him a question she had been holding since the elder hall. They were at the dinner table, the fire burning low, the meal finished. The moment had the texture of the ones she was learning to recognize, the ones where the day's armor had been set down by incremental degrees, and the person underneath had more room. You deflected when I asked why you haven't sought a real bond, she said. You said it wasn't relevant to the current arrangement. He looked at her steadily. That was true at the time, he said. At the time, it was still a transaction we were negotiating. And now, a long pause. The fire. The mountain wind against the walls. The old stone sound of it. Familiar already. When I was 19, he said, slowly, with the care of someone excavating something load-bearing, I made a choice that protected the pack. It required... he paused. It required doing things that left marks, not visible ones, but I understood afterward that I had become someone who could do those things, and I have spent a long time believing that someone who could do those things was not someone who had the right to ask another person to bond with them. Sarah was very still. That's not how rights work, she said quietly. I know that, he said. Intellectually, I know it's not how rights work. But knowing a thing intellectually and being free of it are not the same thing. He looked at the table. You asked an honest question. That's the honest answer. She sat with this for a long moment, with the weight of it, with the 17-year-old boy who had held a mountain pass, with the man who had built a system for living that was comprehensive and functional and carefully arranged to make the question of what he deserved irrelevant. For what it's worth, she said finally, from the outside, from the perspective of someone who has had considerable practice evaluating what people are made of beneath what they show, you are not what you think you are. He looked up at her. You can disagree, she said. You're allowed, but I'm telling you what I see. The fire settled. Outside, the mountain wind moved through the pines in the long, wave-like sound she had started, without noticing when, to find comforting. He didn't disagree. He also didn't look away. And the evening held them both in it, the way evenings do when they contain something that neither person has words for yet, but both have begun, quietly and without announcement, to reach toward. Chapter 6. The Thing About Proximity. 3 weeks into her time at Iron Vale, Sarah made a discovery that she filed immediately under things I will not examine too closely while I still have work to do. She had stopped counting the days, not forgotten. She was not a person who forgot things, but the specific, deliberate tallying she had been doing in the first week, the quiet mental arithmetic of 14 days remaining, 13 days remaining, had simply ceased. She noticed its absence the way you notice a sound that has stopped. The sudden, slightly disorienting quiet where something used to be. She told herself it was because the work was absorbing. This was true. It was also, she privately acknowledged, not the complete truth. The complete truth was more complicated, and she was not yet ready to look at it directly. And so she did what she did with all things she wasn't ready for. She set it aside with the precise organizational intention of returning to it when she had the appropriate resources. Then she went to breakfast. The pack had begun to accept her. Not immediately. There had been a period in the first week where she was the subject of the careful, measuring attention that communities give to anyone new. The period of being watched and cataloged before the verdict is reached. She had moved through this period the way she moved through most scrutiny, without performing casualness, without aggressive friendliness, without the particular brand of anxious over-helpfulness that made people feel like they were being managed. She had simply been present and genuine and interested, and had let the pack reach its own conclusions. The conclusions, and she found, were more positive than she'd anticipated. Bram, the timber crew leader, had apparently said something to several people that then moved through the pack in the efficient, quiet way that reputation moved in small communities. She never heard exactly what he'd said, but she began to notice a shift. The way eyes in the market moved to her with recognition rather than assessment, the way people in the hall included her in conversations rather than pausing them at her approach. Nira was her most enthusiastic advocate, partly by temperament and partly because she had apparently decided at the dinner on the first night that Sarah was the most interesting person to arrive at Iron Vale in years and had no intention of being conservative about this. "You asked Aldrich to tell you something true about himself," Nira said one morning, then appearing at the door of Sarah's room with the momentum of someone who had been thinking about something since before the sun was fully up. "On the first night. I heard about it. Everyone heard about it." "That's an alarming amount of transmission for one dinner," Sarah said. "This is a mountain pack in early winter," Nira said, dropping into the chair by the window with the proprietary ease she had everywhere in the main hall. "We have limited entertainment." "What did he say? Aldrich? What was his true thing?" Sarah thought about it. Aldrich had been quiet for a moment after she'd turned the question back to the table, and then had said, with the gruff, undecorated delivery he used for things that actually mattered to him, "I was afraid during the culling. Every day of it. And I stayed anyway. I don't know which of those things to be proud of." Yet the table had been very quiet after that, and then Gabriel had said, from the end of the table without looking up, "Both. You should be proud of both." And Aldrich had looked at him with the compressed, complicated expression of 15 years of shared history and said nothing, which was more than enough. "That's between him and the table," she told Nira. Nira sighed with the theatrical dissatisfaction of someone who genuinely loves information and finds its absence personally inconvenient. "You're no fun." "I'm extremely fun," Sarah said. "I'm just selective about which information I share, which is, incidentally, going to be important at the summit, so perhaps we should view it as practice." Nira looked at her with the bright, assessing eyes she turned on everything. "You know what I think?" she said. Almost certainly something I'll need to decide how to receive." "I think," Nira said, ignoring this with the practice ease of someone who ignored inconvenient framings regularly, that you're good for him. I think he's been alone in a very specific way for a very long time, and you're the first person I've seen him actually talk to, not report to, not strategize with, talk. Sarah kept her expression steady. We have a practical arrangement to prepare for. Yes, Nira said, in the tone of someone agreeing with something while meaning the opposite. Absolutely. That's what it is. She left before Sarah could respond, which was, Sarah suspected, entirely intentional. The summit preparation entered a more intensive phase in the 4th week, and Oren convened what he called pressure sessions, simulated encounters that replicated the social dynamics of the summit as closely as possible, with pack members playing the roles of the other alphas and their mates. These were Oren's design, and he was, she found, remarkably good at replicating social pressure without manufacturing cruelty. The sessions were rigorous without being unkind, the stand-in antagonists precise about the specific angles of challenge without taking pleasure in the difficulty. Hartwell's alpha was played by Voss, which was a casting choice of considerable accuracy. Voss had the same economy of expression, the same controlled aggression beneath a composed surface. She played him without caricature, which made the practice more useful and considerably less comfortable. The first pressure session. Sarah found the gaps. Your history is solid, Oren told her afterward, with the direct assessment she'd learned to trust because it was never inflated and never catastrophized. The timeline, the details, consistent and specific, which is good. Where it shows is in the transitions. Between what? Between talking about him and talking to him. He paused. When someone asks you a direct question about your own history, you answer like yourself. Confident, specific, clear. When the question shifts to how you two interact, you move to a slightly different register. More careful, more managed. She sat with this. He was right. She could feel it being right. The way you feel a diagnosis land accurately. She was performing the interaction where she needed to inhabit it. What's the fix? She asked. Practice the transitions, he said. Not the content. The content is fine. Practice the state of mind you're in when you're actually talking to him versus the state of mind you're in when you're describing it. She took this back to the morning work sessions. Oren says I need to practice the transitions, she told Gavriel, between the story and the reality. He had been reviewing correspondence. He set it down with the full attention immediacy she'd noticed he gave important things. The correspondence could wait. This couldn't. What does he mean? When I'm talking with you, I'm present, she said, as precisely as she could manage. When I'm talking about talking with you, I'm slightly outside it. That gap shows. He considered this. So you need to be in the same state in both contexts. Yes, which means I need to understand what the state actually is. And so I can access it deliberately. She paused. What do you notice? When we're talking, what is it actually from your side? He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had accumulated the most library of, the level, measuring, fully present attention that was neither performed interest nor managed distance. Ease, he said finally. Whatever the opposite of managing is, you argue with yourself in real time, which means I can follow the actual shape of your thinking rather than just its conclusion. I find that, he paused, uncommon. Ease, she repeated, rolling it around. All right, what's the equivalent for you? The same. He said it simply, without decoration. She absorbed this, turned it over, set it next to all the other things she had been setting aside in the organized returning to it later place. Then we should practice having that kind of conversation when other people are present, she said. So it becomes the default and not the exception. He nodded. At dinner, in the pack, wherever Oren's sessions put pressure on the transitions. Yes. All right. The practice produced something neither of them had precisely planned for. Not the transitions. Those improved steadily with the reliable responsiveness that properly identified problems have when you address the actual source of them rather than the symptoms. The pressure sessions in week 4 went better. Voss as Hartwell got less mileage from the conversational challenges. The moments where Sarah slipped into performed distance became fewer and shorter. But the practice of bringing the ease into other contexts, the deliberate application of it to group meals and pack encounters and the small interstitial moments of moving through a shared space, that produced something additional, something incremental and organic that built itself on the scaffolding of the work without asking permission. She could not have identified the exact point where the ease stopped being a thing she was practicing and became a thing that simply was. It happened the way the landscape had changed on the journey north, gradually, undramatically, until you looked back and couldn't name the mile marker. She noticed it in details, the way she knew, without looking, when he had entered a room. Not through the bond. She was still clear on this, still certain, but through the specific, uncalibrated awareness of someone who has spent enough time in proximity to another person that their presence becomes a kind of weather you can read without lifting your head. The way he had begun, at some point she hadn't clocked, to address remarks at dinner to both her and the room, not splitting the difference, but genuinely including her in the direction of the thought, as if her response was part of what he was working toward when he said the thing. The way she had begun to leave space in her own thinking for his perspective, not because she needed it to function, but because she had found, to her considerable surprise, that two things were often more interesting than one, and his specific way of looking at things was different from hers in ways that were generative rather than contradictory. Small things, on the kind of things that don't announce themselves. She noticed them and put them in the place she was putting everything she wasn't ready to examine, which was becoming, she acknowledged, extremely crowded. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday. She would always remember it as a Tuesday, specifically because she had been in the middle of a letter to her mother, the fourth since arriving, each one carefully balanced between honest and reassuring, when Aldrich knocked at the study door with the controlled urgency of a man moving quickly while performing the appearance of moving at normal speed. "We have a situation," he said. The situation was this. A rider had arrived from the Greyvale neutral grounds, the summit location, carrying a message from Duskmere's Alpha. The message was, in diplomatic language, a formal request that Ironvale provide documentation of the bond prior to the summit. Not at the summit, prior to it. Submitted to the Neutral Grounds Council for verification. The documentation they were requesting was a bonding registry entry, the formal PAC record that was created when a bond was certified by a PAC elder and entered into the territory's permanent records. They did not have one. They could not produce one without either committing a falsifiable forgery or revealing the arrangement. She found Gavriel in the study with Aldrich, Oren, and Taya. The four of them arranged in the configuration of people who have identified a serious problem and are in the early stages of determining whether it is solvable. She came in, closed the door, looked at the message that Oren was holding, and read it in approximately 40 seconds. This is Duskmere overplaying," she said. They looked at her. "The summit charter didn't require prior documentation," she continued. "It required presentation as a bonded pair at the summit itself. Duskmere is trying to manufacture a pre-summit requirement that doesn't exist in the agreed terms. If Iron Veil responds to this with documentation, it implicitly accepts the legitimacy of the request, which then sets a precedent that prior verification is required, which they can use against any future territorial claim. If Iron Veil refuses to respond, Duskmere characterizes the refusal as suspicious. The room was quiet. "So we don't respond to the request as asked," she said. "We respond to what the request actually is." "Which is?" Aldrich said, so with the tone of someone who had arrived at the same conclusion but wanted to hear her articulate it. "A provocation," she said, designed to make Iron Veil look either falsifiable or defensive before the summit even begins. The correct response is neither. The correct response is offense. Oren was already leaning forward. "What kind of offense?" She thought for a moment. The real, unhurried thinking that she did when a problem deserved it. Iron Veil sends a response to the Neutral Grounds Council. Not to Duskmere directly, but to the Council, which makes it a formal diplomatic record, stating that you have received what appears to be a unilateral request for documentation not specified in the agreed summit charter, and that you are formally requesting the Council's clarification as to whether this represents an amendment to the charter, since any such amendment would require the agreement of all 7 Pack Alphas. She paused. This does 3 things. It puts the question in front of all 7 Alphas, not just the Neutral Council, which means Hartwell and Duskmere have to either publicly admit they're trying to add requirements not in the charter, which will lose them the Neutral Alphas' support, or publicly withdraw the request, which means the documentation question disappears. And it signals to the other 5 Alphas, before the summit begins, that Iron Veil is not defensive, that Iron Veil goes forward. Silence. Aldrich looked at Gavriel. Gavriel was looking at Sarah with the fully present, completely unperformed attention that she had learned. In 4 weeks was the specific expression of a man encountering something he finds genuinely, essentially valuable. "Write it," he said, not to Oren, to her. "I'll draft it," she said. "Oren should review for formal diplomatic language, and you should—" "You write it," he said. "As I said." She held his gaze for a moment. Then, "All right." She sat down at the study table, took paper, and began. She wrote for 2 hours, with Oren looking over her shoulder and making occasional adjustments to the formal register while leaving the architecture of the argument intact. Gavriel did not look over her shoulder. He sat at the standing desk in the corner and worked through his own correspondence with the settled focus of a man who has assigned a thing to the right person and sees no reason to supervise the assignment. She noticed this, while filed it in the place where she kept things about him that she found. She filed it and kept writing. The final letter was 4 paragraphs. The first established the facts. The second named the discrepancy between the request and the charter. The third asked it as well as the formal question. Amendment or error? In the precise, weaponized politeness of someone who knows the question cannot be answered favorably for the person who prompted it. The fourth reaffirmed Iron Veil's commitment to the summit and its existing terms, expressed with the calm, settled confidence of a pack that has nothing to prove and knows it. She passed it to Oren. He read it twice, made 2 small changes to terminology, and handed it back with the expression of someone reluctantly impressed. "This is good," he said. "This is very good." "Send it today," she said. "Oh, before Duskmere has time to build on the opening they think they've created." Oren took it to Gavriel. She watched Gavriel read it, watched the movement of his eyes across the page, the controlled, comprehensive read of someone processing and assessing simultaneously. He reached the end, set it down. He looked up at her across the room. "Perfect," he said. She wanted to say, "It's just strategic thinking," It's just the logical application of what I've been learning. She didn't. She accepted the word for what it was, precise, unembellished, from a man who did not say things he did not mean, and felt it land in the place that had been empty for a very long time. The letter went out that evening. The response from the Neutral Grounds Council arrived 4 days later, and with the compressed efficiency of a message written by people who had been handed a problem they had not requested and wished to resolve it as quickly as possible. The charter requirement stood as written. No prior documentation was required. All 7 alphas had been informed. Duskmere did not respond. Hartwell did not respond. Aldrich, when the response was read aloud at dinner, looked at Sarah across the table with an expression that had, at some point in the last 4 weeks, traveled the full distance from guarded assessment to something that looked, in the firelight of the low-ceilinged dining room, remarkably like respect. "I was wrong about you," he said, simply, directly, in the way of a man who had decided that the wrong thing was to not say it. "You were being careful about him," she said. I don't think that was wrong." Something moved in Aldrich's face, the compressed, complicated expression she recognized as the 15 years with one person expression. He looked from her to Gabriel and back. "No," he said. "I suppose it wasn't." That night, after dinner, she stood at the window of her room and looked out at the Iron Vale Mountains in the winter dark. The white peaks against the black sky, the pine forests on the lower slopes moving in the wind like something breathing, and acknowledged quietly to herself, in the privacy of her own mind with no audience and no purpose except honesty, she did not want to leave. The thought arrived with the specific, clear weight of something true, not wishful, not performed, not the complicated, conditional wanting she was used to, the wanting that always had a but behind it. Oh, if only, when the ceremony finally. This was simpler, more structural, the wanting of someone who has found a place that fits the specific shape they are, and is now required to acknowledge that this is what fitting felt like. She stood with it for a long time. Outside, the mountain moved in the wind. Inside, she let herself know what she knew. And then, because she was her mother's daughter and her grandmother's granddaughter and herself, she straightened her spine and decided that knowing it and doing something about it were 2 different things, and she would determine which of them was appropriate when she had more information. She was very good at waiting for more information. She was becoming less certain this was a virtue. Chapter 7. Grayveal. The summit began on a Thursday. Sarah knew this was unremarkable information. Summits began on days, the way everything began on days, and Thursdays had no particular significance in pack calendar tradition. But she would remember it as a Thursday specifically, the way she remembered the Tuesday of the Duskmere letter, because her mind had apparently decided to anchor the significant things to the specific texture of their ordinary containers. They departed Iron Vale 2 days prior, a traveling party of 9. Herself and Gabriel, Aldrich, Voss, Oren, Taya, and 3 additional riders, whose function was security and whose presence was, in the particular grammar of interpack summits, also a statement. You brought exactly as many people as conveyed confidence without conveying aggression. Oren had calculated the number with the focused precision of someone who understood that optics and mathematics were, in diplomatic contexts, the same subject. The journey to Grayveal took them south and east, back through the mountain pass, then along the river road that connected the northern and central territories. She had made this road in reverse 5 weeks ago, from the other direction, with the Iron Vale escort and her mother's oat bread, and a carefully maintained internal argument about whether she was making a catastrophic decision. She was making the return journey in entirely different condition. This was not something she examined at length. She had become, over the past week, somewhat practiced at not examining things at length that were not yet fully formed and would not benefit from premature dissection. She was going to the summit. She was going to do what she had agreed to do. She was going to do it well. Everything else could wait its turn. Gabriel rode beside her. This was logistically natural. The alpha and his mate would travel together at the head of the party. But she was aware of the choice inside the logistics. He could have ridden ahead with Aldrich. He could have shifted to the back for conversation with Oren or Voss. He rode beside her at the same pace, and they talked the way they had learned to talk over 5 weeks of mornings and dinners and evenings by the fire, with the specific ease that Oren had wanted her to access under pressure and that she had, somewhere in the second week, stopped having to try for. "Tell me something I should know about Grayville," she said, on the first morning of the journey. That's not in Oren's files," he considered. "The neutral grounds have a head steward, a man named Colum, been there 20 years. He controls the practical logistics of every summit, room assignments, seating, meal timing, the order of address in the formal sessions. Officially, he's administrative. In practice, he has more influence over the summit's atmosphere than any of the alphas because he controls the conditions that the alphas operate in. So we should know him," she said. "We should know him before anyone else does," Gabriel said. "The packs who arrive and go straight to their suites without speaking to the staff are the ones who find their seating arrangements subtly inconvenient for 3 days. And the packs who speak to the staff find the lighting in the formal session room adjusted to be slightly more favorable. They find their meals arrive at the optimal temperature. Find that the incidental details of their experience are managed by someone who has decided they're worth managing for." "You've done this before," she said. "The staff conversation." "Every summit I've attended." He paused. "It's not manipulation. It's recognizing that people who are treated as invisible are neither, and that treating them as the significant people they are tends to produce genuine goodwill, which is more reliable than manufactured advantage." She looked at him. The morning was pale and cold, the river road wide enough for 2 abreast with frost at its edges. His profile against the winter sky was the same geography it always was, severe, settled, without performance. "You're more of a humanist than your reputation suggests," she said. The interior almost smile. "Oh, don't tell anyone. I have an image to maintain." Grayville was neutral in the way that only carefully curated places manage to be. Neutral not by absence of character, but by the precise calibration of all its elements to convey belonging to no one and welcome to everyone. The main hall was enormous and low-lit, its stone walls hung with the emblems of all 7 packs in equal size and equal position. The grounds around it were formal but not cold, manicured spaces that suggested civilization without implying ownership. They arrived to find 3 other packs already in residence. Sarah cataloged them from the entrance. 2 she identified immediately from Oren's files. Ashvin Pack, Middle Territory, politically neutral, reliable, and Caldmere, whose alpha was an older woman named Riva, who had, according to every record, that spent 40 years being the most reliably principled voice at every summit she attended. The 3rd pack she placed by their insignia after a brief mental cross-reference. "Stonemark," she said quietly, to Gabriel's left. "Yes," he said, equally quiet. "Stonemark is uncommitted on the territorial questions. They'll follow Reva's lead if she takes one." "Then we should speak to Riva early." "Yes." They moved through the entrance in the specific configuration they had practiced, not performing togetherness, but inhabiting it, She was aware of the attention in the room the way she'd been aware of it at the mating ceremony, except that this attention had a different quality. The ceremony attention had been the particular, slightly contemptuous attention of people watching someone they'd already categorized. This was the sharp, full professional attention of people who were here because they were very good at reading situations and had encountered a situation they hadn't fully prepared for. The blood alpha of Ironvale with someone. She felt it land across the room. The recalibration, the rapid assessment. She kept her posture level, her expression open but not eager, her pace unrushed. Beside her, Gabriel was precisely himself, no more and no less than he always was, which was, she had come to understand, its own kind of statement. Colum found them before they found him. He was a small man, spare and neat, with the contained efficiency of someone who has spent 20 years managing large, complicated social events and has distilled the experience into the minimum effective motion. He introduced himself with the direct, an unapologetic professionalism of someone who knew exactly how important he was and had no need to announce it. "Alpha Dravith," he said. "Welcome back to Greyville." And he turned to Sarah with the assessing, rapid attention of someone reading a new variable into a known equation. "Sarah," she said, extending her hand in the Northern Pack style, open palm, direct. "Thank you for having us." Something in Colum's expression registered and reorganized. "The pleasure is ours," he said, with the specific sincerity of someone who doesn't use the phrase as filler. "I have you in the East Wing, Alpha Suite, with the view of the valley. If there's anything you need adjusted, the East Wing will be perfect," Gabriel said. Then, in the same register, "How are the preparations holding?" "And Oren tells me the session room seating was rearranged from the preliminary plan." Colum's expression shifted to the particular satisfaction of someone who has been asked the right question. "A necessary adjustment," he said. "The original plan had 2 of the larger delegations with sightline conflicts in the afternoon session. We corrected it last week." He paused. "You'll find the afternoon light is better from your position than the preliminary plan would have given you." "I appreciate the attention to detail," Gabriel said. "It's what I'm here for," Colum said. And then, in the seamless way of someone whose intelligence expressed itself through the management of practical things, "Dinner tonight is informal. The alphas and their parties in the main hall, no structured seating. Tomorrow the formal sessions begin. I'd suggest arriving to dinner early. It gives you the room before the room fills." "We'll do that," Sarah said. Colum looked at her with the compressed, evaluating expression of someone making a final assessment. "Very good," he said, and the phrase had more in it than the words. He moved away, already redirecting to the next thing, the next arrival, the next practical problem to solve. Aldrich appeared at Gabriel's shoulder from wherever he had been in the entrance configuration. "Hartwell's delegation arrived an hour ago," he said quietly. "Duskmere expected this evening." "Good," Gabriel said. "We have time." They found Riva in the East Garden. She was alone, which was by design. Sarah could see the studied casualness of a woman who had arranged to be findable without appearing to be waiting. Reva was, in person, as smaller than the file had suggested and simultaneously more substantial, the way people who have genuine gravity tend to be. Less physically imposing than you expect and impossible to overlook. She was perhaps 65. Her hair was white and close-cropped. Her face the specific kind of weathered that comes from spending decades in actual conditions rather than managed ones. She wore Caldmere's colors, dark green and copper, without any of the additional embellishment that alphas often added to formal contexts, which told Sarah something. Gabriel introduced them with the simple directness he used for introductions he actually wanted to make. Alpha Reva, you've not met Sarah. Reva looked at Sarah with the comprehensive attention of someone who has spent 40 years reading people and has gotten very good at it. Not unkind, not warm, yet precise. No, she said. I haven't. To Sarah. How are you finding the North? Better than I expected, Sarah said, which is either an advertisement for managing expectations or a genuine endorsement of the territory. I'm not certain which yet. Reva's expression moved. A slight shift that resolved briefly into something that might have been amusement. Honest, she said. That's refreshing. She looked from Sarah to Gabriel and back with the particular look of someone who has watched a great many couples and is cross-referencing what she sees against a detailed internal model. I'll be direct with you both, she said. I've received the communication about the charter request. I read it carefully. I drew conclusions about what it was and where it came from. What conclusions? Gabriel asked. That Duskmere overplayed, she said. Sarah's own phrase, from the day of the letter, and Sarah felt something settle in her at the accuracy of the echo. And that the response from Iron Veil was authored by someone who understood exactly what overplaying it was. Her eyes moved to Sarah. It was very well written. Thank you, Sarah said. I haven't decided yet whether it changes anything about my position on the territorial questions, Reva continued, without apology for the frankness. But I wanted you to know that I read it, and that I read you both. She paused. I've been doing this for 40 years. I know what a constructed presentation looks like, and I know what the real thing looks like. I'm telling you what I see is the real thing, which is not something I say lightly. The statement hung in the evening air of the East Garden, and specific and weighted. Sarah did not look at Gabriel. She kept her eyes on Reva and kept her expression exactly what it was. The face of someone receiving a true thing and deciding what to do with its weight. That means a great deal, she said. From someone whose judgment I already respected before I met her. Reva looked at her for a long moment. Come find me tomorrow morning before the first session, she said. I want to talk about the boundary language in Section 4 of the Charter. I have concerns that I believe Ironvale shares, and I prefer to share concerns with people I've decided to trust before I share them in rooms full of people I haven't. We'll be there, Gabriel said. Reva nodded. A single, undecisive motion, and walked back toward the main hall with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has spent 40 years knowing exactly where she was going. Hartwell's Alpha arrived at dinner. His name was Edrin. She'd memorized the file on him during the journey, the way she'd memorized all of them, with the focused retention that she applied to information that would need to be accessible under pressure. He was 43. Built with the deliberate physical solidity of someone who had decided early in life that physical presence was a form of argument, and had maintained it with the discipline of someone who liked winning arguments. His mate, Kala, was quieter and sharper and considerably more dangerous in the ways that actually mattered, which Sarah had surmised from the file and confirmed in the first 30 seconds of observation. She watched them enter the main hall from the position she and Gabriel had taken. Early, per Column's suggestion, in a spot near the fire that provided a good sightline to the entrance without being so central as to invite immediate approach. She watched Edrin scan the room on entry, the automatic territorial survey that dominant alphas did in new spaces, and watched his eyes find Gabriel with the specific quality of attention that preceded a challenge. Then his eyes moved to her. She held the look with the level, open steadiness she'd had 5 years of practice maintaining under unfavorable attention. Not defiant. Defiance would have been a reaction. and reactions gave things power. Just present, settled, and the look of someone who had been assessed before and found it neither frightening nor particularly interesting. Edren looked away first. She felt Gavriel's hand settle briefly at the small of her back. The lightest possible contact, the casual, unconscious contact of someone whose body has made a proprietary statement before their mind has decided to, and then lift again. The touch lasted perhaps 2 seconds. She did not react to it externally. Internally, she noted it and added it to the crowded place. Kala crossed the room before Edren had finished his territorial survey, separating from him with the easy independence of a woman who operated as her own entity within the pair, which Sarah immediately respected. She came to them directly, yet without the social circling that most people did when approaching a situation they hadn't fully mapped. "I'm Kala," she said, to Sarah, not to Gavriel. "Hartwell, I've been curious about you since the letter." "The letter has been good for introductions," Sarah said. Kala's mouth moved, a brief, sharp thing that was more genuine than a smile and less controlled than a smirk. It was a good letter. Whoever wrote it understood exactly what was being done and responded to the thing itself rather than the surface of it. She paused. Edren was annoyed. He doesn't like being read accurately. "Most people don't," Sarah said. "No," Kala agreed. "But though some of us have learned to find it useful." She looked from Sarah to Gavriel with the same comprehensive attention Reva had used. The look of someone cross-referencing observation against a detailed internal model. "You're not what I expected," she said to Gavriel. "Either of you, together." "What did you expect?" Gavriel asked. Kala was quiet for a moment. "Something more deliberate," she said. "More constructed." She left this sitting. Didn't explain it further. Didn't soften it. Let it be what it was. "I appreciate the honesty," Sarah said. "I appreciate that you're still standing here having this conversation," Kala said. "Most people would have moved away after I said that." She paused. "I'll tell you something. Edren's position on the territorial questions is Edren's position. I don't always share it. And I have, on over 22 years of attending these things, developed the habit of speaking to the people I think will be worth speaking to after the summit is over, regardless of what happens during it." She extended her hand. Not the pack greeting, but a different gesture, informal and direct. Sarah took it. "I'll look for you tomorrow," Kala said, and moved back toward Edren with the same easy independence she'd left him with. The room was filling. The light was the warm, managed light of a fire-heavy space in winter, amber and low, the kind of light that rounded edges. Across the hall, she could see Duskmir's delegation arriving, 6 people in the dark blue of their pack colors. Their alpha, a tall, spare man named Ferrin, who moved through the room with the controlled, or particular manner of someone who has identified the room as a problem to be solved and is currently solving it. He found her and Gavriel with his eyes before he'd been in the room 30 seconds. She felt the assessment. Harder than Edren's, less physically dominant and more calculating. The look of someone checking the reality of a thing against their own model of it and finding discrepancies they hadn't planned for. She met his eyes with the same level, settled look she'd given Edren. Beside her, Gavriel spoke, quietly, meant for her alone, without changing his own expression or the direction of his gaze. "Ferrin is reassessing," he said. "Yes," she said, equally quiet. He expected something easier to dismiss. "Are you all right?" The question arrived in the same register as everything he said. Level, direct, without performance. On the question of someone who actually wanted to know. She considered it genuinely. The room was full of powerful people who were actively working out how to use her, along with everything she'd told herself about the next 4 days, and the work, and the transition after. The complicated, crowded place was very full tonight. "I'm all right," she said. And then, because it was true and because she had decided that accuracy was the only currency worth trading in, "Better than I expected." She felt him turn slightly. That fractional reorientation, the one that meant his attention had moved from the room to her specifically. "Good," he said. Not more than that. Just the one word, with the weight of a man who meant it completely. Duskmere made their first formal move at the end of dinner. Not Farron directly, through his second, and a woman named Pell, who found them near the fire as the evening wound toward its close. Pell was efficient and pleasant in the way of someone executing a task they haven't been asked to enjoy, and she delivered the message with the precise, formal courtesy of someone who knew exactly what the message was doing and had decided the cleanest approach was direct delivery. "Alpha Farron extends his congratulations on the recent bonding," she said, "and looks forward to meeting with you formally in tomorrow's sessions." The word bonding was doing specific work. So was congratulations, with its implicit suggestion that the bond required congratulation, which implied it was recent enough to be notable, which was a way of planting a question about the timeline in the formal record of the dinner exchange. Sarah spoke before Gavriel could. "Mom, please tell Alpha Farron that the congratulations, while kind, are a little late," she said, with the warm, slightly amused tone of a woman addressing a minor social error on behalf of someone who meant well. "We've been somewhat past the congratulations stage for some time now, but we appreciate the warmth." Pell blinked. A fractional recalibration. "Of course," she said after a beat. "I'll convey that." She moved away. Aldrich, who had been close enough to hear, appeared at Gavriel's other side with the expression of a man trying very hard not to look pleased. "Warmth," he said under his breath. "It was the right word," Gavriel said. "She delivered it beautifully," Aldrich said, with the compressed, complicated tone that meant he was feeling something he hadn't expected to feel. Sarah looked at the fire and did not say anything, because the moment didn't require it, and she had learned, was still learning, that not all the moments you wanted to keep needed to be spoken to stay real. Chapter 8. What the Summit Reveals. The first formal session began at 9 in the morning. The session room was everything Column's careful management had made it. The afternoon light that would eventually pour through the western windows was not yet present at 9, but the morning arrangement was good, even, clear, the kind of light that flattened no one and favored no one, which in a room full of people who made their livings reading faces was its own form of fairness. The 7 alphas sat at the central table. Their seconds and key advisors sat in the ring of chairs behind them. Partners, bonded mates, where present, occupied the secondary ring, available for consultation but formally adjacent rather than central. Sarah sat behind Gavriel's left shoulder. She had chosen the left deliberately. It was the position that gave her a clear sightline to both the central table and the full secondary ring, which meant she could watch everyone. Oren was to her right, his files organized with the focused precision of a man who had prepared for this the way others prepared for battle. She watched. The first session was procedural. The formal ratification of the summit charter, the acknowledgement of each PAC's attendance, the reading of the agreed agenda by the Neutral Grounds Council representative. Standard. The language was formal and slow, the pace deliberate, and she used the time not to listen to the words. She already knew them, but to watch the room. She watched how Edran sat, forward in his chair, elbows on the table, and the physical posture of someone who wanted the room to know they were taking up space. She watched Farron, upright, controlled, his hands flat on the table in front of him, the posture of someone whose physical stillness was a kind of camouflage for active internal movement. She watched Riva, relaxed and utterly attentive, the posture of someone who had been in enough of these rooms to know that comfort and attention were not mutually exclusive. She watched how the secondary ring responded to the primary ring, the small reflexive adjustments that bonded pairs made when their alpha said something. The slight forward lean when there was agreement, the fractional stillness when there was concern, the look exchanged over a shoulder when something required private communication. She practiced, silently and internally, it making herself part of that grammar. When Gabriel spoke, first time, formal introduction of Ironvale's position on the boundary renewal language in Section 3, she felt the attention in the room shift toward him and let her own attention follow with it naturally, the way a plant turns toward light. Not performed, inhabited. Kala, from the Hartwell secondary ring, caught her eye once, gave her the briefest, most minimal nod. Not sympathy, not warning. Something more neutral and more useful. I see you. You're doing it right. Then looked away. The morning session recessed at 11. The hallway outside the session room had the particular energy of a paused formal event. People in clusters. The conversational topology of alliances and distances made legible by who stood near whom. She moved through it with Gabriel, Aldrich flanking, and noted the configurations with the attention she gave everything. Farron crossed the hall toward them. He moved with the directness of a man who had decided that the preliminary maneuvering was complete and it was time for something more explicit. He was alone. No second, no advisor. Which was either a statement of confidence or a choice to make the encounter look informal. She catalogued both possibilities and waited. Dravith, he said. Then, with the fractional pause of someone introducing a term they've decided to deploy. And your mate. Farron, Gabriel said. Level. Neither welcoming nor hostile. The exact middle register of a man who was giving nothing. Farron's eyes moved to Sarah with the specific, a professional assessment she'd been receiving since dinner last night. The kind that was looking for gaps rather than information. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. We haven't, she said. Sarah. She offered her hand in the northern style, open palm, direct, and watched him receive it with the slight recalibration of someone whose preparation hadn't included this specific greeting. I understand you're from the Veyrath Pack, he said, a long way south of Ironvale. It is, she agreed pleasantly. Though I've found the North has significant advantages over the South that aren't immediately obvious from a distance. Such as? The trees, for one, she said. And the people, for another. Though I'll admit the winters require a period of adjustment. I imagine a great many things require adjustment, Farron said. And the sentence had something additional in it. A suggestion, faint and deniable, that she heard clearly and chose to receive as if she hadn't. Most worthwhile things do, she said, with the warm, slightly rueful tone of someone sharing a universal truth. I find adjustment is usually proportionate to worth. The things that require more of it tend to be more valuable at the end. She let a beat pass, then. I've been looking forward to hearing Duskmere's position on the Eastern boundary language in session this afternoon. Oren tells me your historical claim documentation is particularly thorough. The shift was smooth, from the territory he was probing toward to the territory she was redirecting him to, with the compliment as the hinge. Farron blinked. The fractional recalibration of someone who has arrived at a specific conversational destination and found themselves in a different room. It is, he said, after a beat. We've documented 3 generations of I'd be very interested to see the methodology, she said. Oren's been working on Iron Vale's equivalent documentation for the northern segments, and the methodology questions are genuinely complex. Perhaps there's an opportunity for comparison at some point during the summit. Farron looked at her. She looked back with the open, interested expression of someone who has offered a genuine thing and is waiting to see if it's received. Perhaps, he said. He moved away, and not the retreat of someone who has lost ground. She was careful not to have made it that, but the repositioning of someone who needs to recalculate before the next approach. Gavriel was beside her, had been beside her through the entire exchange, and had said nothing. She glanced at him. You offered him a collaborative exit, he said quietly. The confrontational exit would have made the afternoon session more difficult, she said. He needed somewhere to go that wasn't defeat. I gave him somewhere. He looked at her with the fully present, unperformed attention. I would have let him walk away with less. I know, she said. That's why I handled it. The interior almost smile arrived and settled. Yes, he said. It is. The afternoon session was where the real work happened. The morning had been procedural. The formal establishing of the summit's framework, the ratification of terms, the parliamentary choreography that gave everyone a shared language before the substantive disagreements began. The afternoon was the substantive disagreements. Hartwell opened on the territorial boundary question with the controlled aggression of someone who had been building toward this and was finally in the room where it counted. Edrin's presentation was good, detailed, well-documented, and structured to make Iron Vale's northern boundary claim look like an expansionist overreach rather than a historical continuation of existing territory. She listened to it with the focused, analytical attention she'd brought to everything Oren had walked her through over the past 5 weeks. She noted where the documentation was strong, or where it was selectively interpreted, where the historical record Edrin was presenting had been curated with enough precision to be technically accurate while telling a very specific story. She leaned forward and said, very quietly to Gavriel's left ear, Section 7 of his documentation, the 1887 compact language. He's reading the boundary definition as it appears in the Hartwell copy of the compact, which differs from the Iron Vale copy in one word. Gavriel turned his head fractionally. Which word? Adjacent versus contiguous, she said. The Hartwell copy says the northern boundary is adjacent to the river. The Iron Vale copy, and I checked this in Oren's files 2 weeks ago because the language looked odd, says contiguous with the river. Adjacent allows for a gap. Contiguous doesn't. The entire eastern boundary claim depends on which reading applies. A brief pause. Oren, Gavriel said, without raising his voice. Oren was already moving. The quiet, controlled movement of someone reaching into organized files with the focused certainty of someone who knows exactly where the thing they need is. He found it in 11 seconds, passed it forward. Gavriel received it, looked at it, and set it on the table in front of him with the settled, unhurried motion of a man placing a card he's been holding. When Edron concluded, Gavriel raised his hand for the floor. Thank you, Alpha Edron, he said, with the formal courtesy of the session room. I'd like to draw the Council's attention to a documentation question before we respond to the substance of the boundary presentation. He laid out the discrepancy, cleanly, precisely, all without aggression. The simple statement of a factual inconsistency that required resolution before the boundary interpretation could proceed. He placed the Iron Vale copy of the 1887 compact on the table for review. The room changed. Not dramatically. These were professional people in a formal context, and professional people in formal contexts had learned to receive unexpected information without visible reaction. but she could feel the shift in the atmospheric pressure of the session room. The specific collective recalibration of 7 alphas and their advisors encountering a variable they hadn't all prepared for. Riva requested a 15-minute recess for documentation review. Edrin, whose expression had moved through several configurations in the 30 seconds since Gavriel had spoken, settled on a surface-level composure that was doing significant work to cover what was underneath. In the recess, Kala appeared at Sarah's elbow, moving through the secondary ring with the easy independence she'd shown at dinner. "The documentation catch," she said quietly. "Was that you?" Sarah kept her expression neutral. "Gavriel's team is thorough." "Gavriel's team," Kala said, with the specific emphasis of someone indicating they've received a non-answer and are noting it accurately, "has apparently gotten significantly more thorough recently." She paused. For what it's worth, Edrin knew about the discrepancy. He was hoping it wouldn't be raised until the formal vote, by which time the framing would have been established. Sarah absorbed this. "That's a significant thing to tell me." "Yes," Kala said simply. It is." She moved away before Sarah could ask the question that was sitting at the front of her mind. Why? The evening of the first day brought a formal dinner. The structured seating that the informal dinner last night had not had, with place cards and the specific arrangement that Colum had managed with the careful attention of someone who understood that where people sat was what they said before they said anything. She and Gavriel were placed at the alpha table's end, the position of formal equivalence with the other bonded pairs. Reva was to their left. Stonemark's alpha, a quiet man named Hadl, who had spent 2 days saying very little and listening enormously, was to their right. The dinner conversation was the formal version. Careful, layered, the kind of talking that happened between people who were simultaneously being social and being strategic, and had long since made peace with the fact that these were not separate activities. She managed it, more than managed. She moved through it with the ease that had become, over 5 weeks, not a practice thing, but a genuine one. She spoke to Riva about the boundary documentation question with the direct intelligence that Riva responded to. She spoke to Hadl about Stonemark's eastern territories with the genuine curiosity she felt, because Oren's files had been sparse on Stonemark, and she found the gaps in her knowledge more interesting than the filled places. And she watched Farron across the table. Watched him watching her, with the recalibrating attention of someone whose model has been revised twice in 1 day and is not finished revising. At some point during the second course, Gavriel's hand found hers under the table. Not a calculated gesture. She would know a calculated gesture. Had spent 5 weeks learning the difference between his deliberate movements and his unconsidered ones. This was unconsidered. His hand simply arrived, loosely, alongside hers, not grasping, not performing. The unconscious movement of someone whose body had made a decision their mind hadn't yet been consulted on. She turned her hand so it rested against his. Neither of them looked at the other. Neither of them said anything. The dinner continued around them, and then the contact was simply there, warm and unremarkable, the way things are when they've always been that way. Reva, she noticed, glanced at their joined hands once, said nothing, returned to her plate with the expression of someone whose model has been confirmed. Duskmere made their move on the second day. It came during the mid-morning recess, in the form of Farron himself. Not a second this time, not Pell, approaching them in the east garden where she and Gavriel had gone for air. The morning had been intense. 3 hours of detailed boundary negotiation in which the 1887 compact discrepancy had required a full council review that had not resolved in Hartwell's favor, and the room's political geography had shifted perceptibly as a result. Farron was alone. Yet he came to them with the directness of a man who had decided the preliminary was over. "I'll speak plainly," he said, which, she had observed, meant the situation was about to become less plain, not more. "Please," Gabriel said. "The charter language regarding bonded pairs," Farron said. "Hartwell and I included it because the principle is sound. Pack stability requires demonstrated commitment to continuity. A bonded alpha speaks for a future, not just a present." He paused. "I want to be direct about the fact that I had concerns, coming into this summit, about the timing of the bond, the circumstances." The word timing was doing the work it had been doing since Pell's congratulations at dinner. She let Gabriel take this one. This was his territory to defend, and she was not going to step in front of something he needed to answer himself. "I'm aware of your concerns," Gabriel said. "State them." Farron looked at him for a moment, then at Sarah, then back. The bond was not entered into the Verath Pack registry until after the summit charter was agreed, he said. "I have the registry dates." She felt the specific, cold clarity of a situation reaching its crisis point. The moment where the pressure that has been building finds its outlet, and everything that happens next happens fast. Gabriel's expression did not change. "The Verath Pack registry date reflects when Elder Marin formally entered the bond," he said. "Elder Marin's documentation processes are the business of the Verath Pack, not of the Duskmere Alpha." A beat. "What is your specific concern, Farron? I'll say it plainly." Farron held his gaze for 3 seconds. "That the bond is not genuine," he said. The garden was very quiet. Sarah turned to face Farron with the full, direct attention she gave things that required it. "I'd like to ask you something," she said. Her voice was level, unhurried, the voice of someone who is about to say something they've known how to say for a long time. "In your 20 years as Alpha of Duskmere, and in the 9 years before that as heir, which is listed in your pack's public record, have you ever seen what a constructed bond presentation looks like? From the inside of a summit room?" Farron blinked. Because I have," she said. "I grew up attending mating ceremonies. I watched constructed presentations, people going through the forms because the forms were required, and moving together in public with the specific managed quality of people performing rather than inhabiting." She paused. "And I watched genuine bonds, the way they look, the way they move, the small things that cannot be manufactured because they happen in the spaces between the deliberate moments, the unconscious orientation, the unrehearsed contact, the way one person's attention moves toward another before they've decided to let it." She let a beat pass. "You have been watching us for 2 days," she said. "You've watched us in formal sessions, and at dinner and in this garden. I'm asking you, as directly as you asked us, what you have actually seen." Farron was very still. The garden held them all in it. The winter air, the pale light, the 3 of them, and the weight of the question. Farron looked at Gabriel, then at Sarah, and then at the space between them, the natural, settled proximity that they had stopped negotiating weeks ago and simply inhabited. "I've seen," he started, stopped. Something moved in his expression. "I came here prepared to see a performance," he said finally. "I did not see one." Silence. "No," Gabriel said. "You didn't." Farron was quiet for a long moment. "The Eastern boundary language," he said, eventually, in the tone of a man choosing his next step with care. "Duskmere's position has been, perhaps, more aggressive than the historical record supports. I'm willing to discuss a revised reading." The shift was so clean, so contained, that if you hadn't been watching for it, you might have missed it. The pivot from the bond challenge to the territorial concession, she offered without acknowledgement of the connection between them. The graceful face-saving repositioning of a man who had been outmaneuvered and was choosing to absorb the loss quietly rather than escalate. She gave him the same exit she'd given him in the hallway, received the pivot without pressing the advantage, responded to the territorial offer with genuine engagement, let the challenge dissolve by simply not picking it up. When Farron left the garden, she stood beside Gabriel in the winter air and felt the specific hollow vibration of a crisis that has passed through and left everything standing. That was... Gabriel started. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "Not yet. Let's just..." She exhaled. "Let's just stand here for a moment." He was quiet. The garden was quiet. They stood in it together, in the way they had learned to stand in spaces, without performing the standing, without managing the proximity, just two people in a winter garden after a hard thing, letting the moment be exactly what it was. She became aware, in the specific, clear way that things become aware of themselves when the pressure lifts and there is suddenly room, that his arm was against hers, that they had drifted in the stillness into contact that neither had initiated deliberately, that the warmth of it was not ambient, was not the temperature of the garden, which was cold, but his specifically. She did not move away. He did not move away. "Sarah," he said, quietly. The word had something in it she hadn't heard there before. Not the level, measured register of the working sessions, not the careful honesty of the evening conversations. Oh, something more interior, something that had been working its way to the surface for a while and had found, in the quiet aftermath of the garden challenge, enough room to arrive. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. The dark green eyes, winter water depth, the color she had been accumulating a library of, had something in them that she had not seen there before. Or had seen, she corrected herself, in fragments, in brief unguarded moments that had each been catalogued and filed and not examined, and was now seeing assembled into its complete form. "The arrangement," he said carefully. "The terms I offered in the Elder Hall." "Yes," she said. "I need you to know that that I meant them. Every exit, every protection I described was genuine." He paused. It in the specific way he paused when he was choosing between a less precise and a more precise version of what he wanted to say. "But I also need you to know that they represent the minimum of what I intended when I asked you here, and not what I..." Another pause. "Not what I want the outcome to be." The garden was very still. She looked at him. This severe, specific, careful man who had read her in 45 seconds and spent 5 weeks demonstrating with increasing clarity that he intended to keep seeing her accurately for as long as she allowed it. "The thing I said," she said slowly, "about not being nervous about most of it, about knowing what I was nervous about." "Yes," he said. "I think I was nervous," she said. "About this. Specifically." "About what, specifically?" "About whether it was real," she said. "What I was feeling. I've had a lot of practice mistaking the ambient energy of rooms for something more personal. I was being careful, making sure I wasn't confusing proximity for something that required more than proximity to be valid." He waited. He was very good at waiting. "I don't think it's proximity," she said. The winter air moved through the garden. Above the walls, she could see the pale winter sky, wide and cold and indifferent in the way that large things are. The sky not knowing and not caring what was being said beneath it, which made the saying feel both smaller and more significant simultaneously. Gabriel took one step toward her. not closing the distance entirely, not rushing the thing that was unfolding at its own pace, but reducing the space by exactly the amount that changed the geometry of them from two people standing adjacently to two people standing together. "I have a question," he said. "Ask it." "When the summit is over," he said, with the careful precision of a man who has spent 5 weeks learning to say true things accurately, and the arrangement has served its purpose, "what do you want to happen?" She looked at him for a long moment. 5 years of mating ceremonies, 5 years of standing in moonlit courtyards and feeling nothing in the direction she was supposed to feel it, and then coming home to her mother's maintained brightness and her aunt's comprehensive briefings, and the pale blue dress and the herbs in the garden. 5 years of being told, in the polite language of repeated absence, that the moon had not seen fit to choose her. She thought about what Hilda had said in the garden gate. The opportunities worth taking are the ones that scare you in the right places. About whether the fear was about what you might lose or about whether you were big enough for what you might become. She knew what she wanted. She had known it. She could trace it back now, with the clear retroactive vision of someone who has been given enough distance to see the shape of something they've been standing inside. Since the 14th night, when she had looked out at the Iron Veil Mountains and acknowledged that she did not want to leave. "I want," she said, "to not go back to Veyrath alone." The last word was barely out before his hand found her face, the same careful, deliberate movement of a man who has been precise about everything and is being precise about this too, met the specific tenderness of someone who has decided not to rush a thing they intend to get right. "Then don't," he said. And in a winter garden at the Greyvale Neutral Grounds, with the summit still unfinished and 3 days left to navigate, and the whole complicated future still ahead of them, Gavriel Draveth, Blood Alpha of the Iron Veil Pack, the most dangerous unmated alpha in 7 territories, a man who had spent 15 years believing he didn't have the right to ask this of anyone, kissed her. And she kissed him back, without performing it, without managing it, just herself, exactly as she'd said she would be from the beginning. Chapter 9. The Cost of Real Things. She had kissed him back. This was the fact she returned to, repeatedly, and with the specific, slightly disoriented attention of someone turning a new object over in their hands to understand its dimensions. Not because she doubted it, but because the reality of it kept arriving with a freshness that the intervening hours hadn't managed to dull. She had kissed him back. In a winter garden, with 3 days of summit still ahead of them and the political future of an entire pack depending on the next 72 hours being executed cleanly, she had kissed the Blood Alpha of the Iron Veil Pack, and it had felt like the most natural thing she had done in 22 years. This was, she privately acknowledged, not ideal timing, not because of the feeling. The feeling was the clearest, a most structurally sound thing she had encountered in a very long time, but because clarity of feeling and clarity of situation were not the same thing, and the situation still required her to be present and functional and strategic. And she was finding that being present and functional and strategic while also carrying the specific, warm, slightly luminous weight of something real was a more complex operation than she had previously had occasion to discover. She managed it. She had, after all, 5 years of practice maintaining function under conditions that required it. She simply managed it with more effort than usual and did not allow the effort to show. The second morning of the summit arrived with the specific clarity of winter sun on frost, sharp, unambiguous, the kind of light that flattered nothing and revealed everything. And she was up before it fully arrived, at the window of the East Suite with tea she'd made herself from the provisions in the room, watching the Greyvale grounds resolve out of the blue pre-dawn dark into their actual shapes. Gavriel had not returned to the suite the previous evening. He had met with Aldrich after the garden. She'd seen them from the corridor, the two of them in the low-lit alcove near the session room, in the close, quiet configuration of a 15-year conversation that didn't need volume to be substantive. She had continued to her room without interrupting it, because some things needed the space they needed. He knocked at 6. She opened the door. He was dressed already. The same dark, plain clothes he wore everywhere. The deliberate simplicity that she had come to understand was not austerity but accuracy. But he looked at her with the fully present attention that had been his register since the elder hall, and in it now was the additional thing she'd seen in the garden. Assembled, not fragmented. The complete version of what had been arriving in pieces for weeks. "Come in," she said. He came in. She poured him tea from the pot she'd made, because this was what she did, found the practical thing and did it. And they sat at the small table by the window in the early morning light and were quiet for a moment in the way they had become practiced at being quiet together. "Aldrich," she said. "Aldrich is working through it," he said. "He'll be fine." What does working through it look like for Aldrich? 15 minutes of legitimate concern expressed as logistics questions, then acceptance, and then the particular form of happiness he expresses as additional criticism, which means he'll be difficult to be around for approximately 48 hours, and then will be the most reliable person in any room for the rest of his life. She considered this. "That sounds about right." He looked at her. "Are you working through it?" "I've been working through it since week 2, she said honestly. "I've had significantly more time than you to reach a conclusion." Something moved in his face, the brief, unguarded expression that appeared when she said something that arrived before his defenses could redirect it. "Week 2, he said. "Don't be smug about it," she said. "It took me another 3 weeks to be willing to look at it directly." "I'm not smug," he said. The interior almost smile, now slightly more exterior than it had been. I'm... He paused, with the precision choosing pause. Relieved is too small a word, but it's the accurate one. She wrapped both hands around her tea and looked at him in the winter morning light and felt, beneath the summit and the days ahead, and the complicated, crowded place that had been the vessel for all the things she wasn't ready to examine, something settle. The specific, quiet settling of a thing that has been in transit for a long time and has found its place. "We have 3 days left," she said. "Yes. We need to finish them well. Yes. Then we can..." She paused. "Then we can work out what everything else looks like." He nodded, not dismissing the everything else, receiving it, placing it carefully in the acknowledged future where it belonged, where it would still be there when they had the room for it. The morning session," he said. "Reva asked us to find her before it started." "I know. I was thinking about that." She set down her tea. She saw the garden. He stilled fractionally. "What do you mean?" "The window of her suite faces east," Sarah said. "And Reva is the kind of person who is at her window at the hour when things in gardens happen." She paused. She didn't see anything that was a performance, which means she saw something that was real. And Reva's read on what is real will matter more to the summit's outcome than anything Farron or Edrin has said so far. He was quiet, processing. "You think she'll use it?" "I think she'll have already used it," Sarah said. In her own mind, to finalize a position she was holding tentatively. She looked at him. "Anna, Reva has been waiting for something to tell her which way to go on the territorial questions. I think we gave it to her last night. Not deliberately, but I think, if I've read her correctly, that watching something real happen is what she needed to make a decision. Why would a real bond affect her position on territorial boundaries? he asked. Not skeptically, genuinely. Because she's been at this for 40 years, Sarah said. She's seen the full range of what power does to people. She knows the difference between an alpha who has something to protect and an alpha who is performing protection. And she paused, finding the precise thing. I think she's been looking for evidence that Iron Veil's claim on the Northern Territories is about the pack, about the people in it, and not about the alpha's personal power. She looked at him steadily. A man who has held himself at a distance from genuine connection for 15 years and then chooses it, specifically in the context of the people he's responsible for, that tells her something about what he's actually made of. The silence this produced was the kind she'd come to recognize as important, the silence of something landing accurately. Riva this morning, she said. Then the afternoon session. Then we find out whether the territorial vote goes the way we need it to. Yes, he said. One thing at a time, she said. One thing at a time, he agreed. Riva was in the same spot in the East Garden where they'd spoken 2 evenings before, and she had a cup of something hot and was looking at the frost on the garden stones with the contemplative attention of someone who finds the world legible in small physical details. She looked up when they approached, and her expression did not change. But something in the set of it had shifted from the first meeting, more settled, more decided. Sit, she said, gesturing to the stone bench across from her. They sat, together, not performing together, simply occupying the bench in the natural proximity that had stopped requiring negotiation weeks ago. Riva looked at them for a moment. I'm going to say something, she said, that is not, technically, any of my business. And then I'm going to say something that is. All right, Sarah said. I saw you in the garden last night, Riva said, without apology, without softening. I was at my window. I wasn't watching deliberately. I happened to see. She paused. What I saw was not a performance. I have attended enough summits and enough ceremonies and watched enough pairs, constructed and genuine, to know the difference with certainty. Neither Sarah nor Gabriel said anything. That's the part that's none of my business, Riva said. The part that is my business is this. I have been holding my position on the boundary questions because I was not certain what Iron Veil's claim was actually in service of. I have concerns about the precedent of Northern territorial expansion, historical, legitimate concerns that I won't dismiss. She looked at Gabriel directly. But I also know the difference between an alpha claiming land because he wants more land. Oh, and an alpha holding ground because there are people on it who depend on the holding. Gabriel met her eyes. The Iron Veil claim is a maintenance of existing boundaries, he said. Not an expansion. The 1887 compact gives us the northern ridge line. We're not asking for more than what the compact established. I know, Riva said. I've read the compact, both versions. She was quiet for a moment. Hartwell and Duskmere frame this as Iron Veil reaching. I don't believe that framing is accurate. And I've decided, this morning, which is why I asked you here, that I will say so in the afternoon session. The weight of what she was offering settled over the garden. Riva's endorsement, 40 years of principled neutrality lending itself to a position, was not a small thing. It was, Sarah calculated, the thing that would bring Stonemark. And Stonemark brought the majority. I need to know one thing, Riva said, before either of them could respond. She looked at Sarah specifically. The letter, the Duskmere response, Farron's position shift yesterday after the garden. Yes? Sarah said. These were you, Riva said. It wasn't a question. Sarah held her gaze. The letter was mine. The Duskmere response was a combination. Gavriel presented. I found the documentation discrepancy. Farron's position shift was a conversation that Gavriel and I had with him together. Reva was quiet for a moment. You understand, she said, that what you've done here, the way you've navigated this, is not what I was told to expect from this situation. What were you told to expect? Sarah asked. Something more fragile, Reva said. But the Southern Pacts have a narrative about Iron Veil, that it's isolated, that it holds its ground through force because it has no other currency, that the Blood Alpha is effective but ungovernable. She looked at Gavriel. Your reputation has served you in some ways and cost you in others. The cost has been that no one expected you to arrive with this. She gestured, a small economical movement that encompassed Sarah and the space between them and everything it represented. Someone who argues with Duskmere through diplomatic channels. Someone who gives your enemies exits that save them face. Someone who reads rooms the way you read ground. She reads rooms better than I do, Gavriel said. Yes, Reva said, with the tone of someone who had noticed this 48 hours ago and was pleased to have it confirmed. She does. She stood, shut with the efficient, unhurried motion of a woman who has concluded what needed to be concluded. I'll be at the session at 9. I suggest you are too. She walked back toward the hall. Sarah and Gavriel sat in the garden for a moment after she left. Aldrich is going to be insufferable about this, Gavriel said. Aldrich is going to be right about this, Sarah said. Which is worse? He looked at her with something in his expression that was more than the interior almost smile, more than the assembled version of what had been arriving in fragments. Something fuller, something that had been given room in the last 16 hours that it hadn't had before. Yes, he said. It is. The afternoon session was the one that counted, that the morning had been documentation review. The Neutral Grounds Council's formal assessment of the 1887 compact discrepancy, which had concluded, after 3 hours of deliberation, that the Iron Veil copy represented the binding text on the grounds that it predated the Hartwell copy by 11 years and had been registered with the Interpact Council in the original agreement year. This was delivered with the careful judicial neutrality of the council representative and received with the controlled, various reactions of 7 alphas who had each been hoping for a different outcome. The afternoon was the boundary vote. Reva spoke first, requested the floor before Edron could establish his framing in the room. She spoke for 6 minutes, in the direct, unhurried, authoritative language of someone who has spent 40 years earning the right to be listened to and has no need to use more words than the thing requires. She laid out her position. The 1887 compact language, correctly read, established Iron Veil's northern boundary as contiguous with the river. The historical documentation supported this reading. The maintenance of this boundary was not expansion. The challenge to it was, in her assessment, a strategic rather than a principled challenge, and one that the summit would be poorly served by endorsing. She recommended a vote to affirm Iron Veil's boundary as established by the compact, and declined the amendment Hartwell and Duskmere had proposed. Haddle of Stonemark seconded within 30 seconds. Sarah, in the secondary ring behind Gavriel's left shoulder, kept her face level and her hands still. Then the vote was called. 5-2. Iron Veil's boundary affirmed. The 2 dissenting votes were Hartwell and Duskmere. Edron's face, in the moment after the count was announced, was controlled in the way of someone who has practiced controlling exactly this expression. She watched him locate the exit, the graceful face-saving repositioning, and find it and take it. He nodded formally, the acknowledgement of a formal process, moved on to the next agenda item. Farron did not look at her during the vote. He looked at the table in front of him and at the count when it was announced, and then at a point in the middle distance that contained something he was working through. When his eyes finally moved, briefly, with the controlled, assessing quality they'd always had, they found her across the room. She held the look with the same level, settled expression she'd given him from the beginning. He looked away. Not the repositioning of defeat, the look of someone who had encountered a situation that had revised a deeply held assumption and was doing the work of revision. She thought about Kala, about I came here prepared to see a performance. I did not see one. About the information Kala had given her about Edrin's documentation strategy, given freely, without apparent strategic reason, as a simple offering from one person who had decided to trust another. She thought about what that had cost Kala and what it had meant, and made a mental note to find her before the summit closed. The crisis arrived that evening, not from Farron, not from Edrin, from the direction she hadn't been watching, which was, she would later reflect, and the nature of crises. They came from the blind spots, always, from the places where attention had been drawn away by the obvious threats, and the subtle ones had been given room to move. It came from within. She was in the main hall after the afternoon session, in the milling, relieved, politically reconfigured energy of a room that has just finished something significant and hasn't yet decided what to do with itself, when she was approached by a woman she didn't recognize, 50s, well-dressed in Veyrath colors, with the specific bearing of someone from the merchant families. It took her 3 seconds to place the face. Petra's mother. The recognition arrived with the cold, clear specificity of something you have been not thinking about and are now required to think about. Petra's mother, Aldara, had the name arrived from the social memories she'd been maintaining since childhood, was a Veyrath merchant family matriarch with connections to the Pack Elder Council and attendance at inter-pack trade summits as a representative of the Southern Merchant Quarter. Of course, she was here. Of course she was. Sarah, Aldara said, with the specific, pleasant warmth of a woman who has decided how this conversation will go before it begins. What a surprise. I had no idea you were here. Aldara, Sarah said, with the same level pleasantness. How is Petra? Wonderfully, Aldara said, and then with the practiced social fluency of a woman who moves between registers as easily as breathing. Bonded last spring. A good match. The Ashvin Pack, merchant family, very solid. A beat. I understand you're with the Iron Veil delegation? I am, Sarah said. In what capacity? The question was pleasant. It was also precise, and it was asking the specific thing that Aldara had come across the room to ask. I'm with Gavriel, Sarah said. Aldara's expression moved. The fractional, rapid recalibration of someone receiving information that doesn't fit their existing model. You mean you're, his mate, Sarah said, simply, without decoration. The silence that followed had a texture. Aldara looked at her, with the comprehensive, cataloging attention of a woman who had known Sarah since childhood, who had attended the same ceremonies, who had a daughter who had spoken those words about 5 mating ceremonies in a courtyard, and in Aldara's expression, as she processed this information, Sarah saw the entire history of what it had meant to be unclaimed Sarah from Veyrath played across someone else's face. The surprise, the rapid revision, the social recalculation. And she watched this arrive, watched it land on Aldara's face with the specific quality of something genuinely unexpected, something that might, in a different light, have been shame. Aldara started. It was good to see you, Sarah said pleasantly. Please give Petra my congratulations on her bonding. She moved away. Her heart was going at a rate that she was managing by not acknowledging. She moved through the hall with the unhurried, deliberate pace she'd perfected and found the east corridor and walked it until the hall sounds had faded enough that she could stop and breathe. She leaned against the corridor wall, old stone, cold, as solid, and breathed. Gabriel found her 3 minutes later. She didn't ask how he'd known where she was. She was past asking certain questions. He came to stand beside her, against the wall, not facing her, both of them looking at the same corridor, which was its own kind of consideration. Veyrath merchant family, he said. It wasn't a question. Petra's mother, she said. Petra was one of the girls at the ceremony. Who said things? She exhaled. Aldara was at the ceremony too. She'll go home and tell everyone what she saw here. Is that a problem? She thought about it, genuinely for a moment, with the real consideration it deserved. No, she said, it isn't. And as she said it, she understood that it was true. Not bravado, not the performed steadiness she'd perfected for rooms that required it. Actually true. She'll go home and say she saw me at the Interpack Summit with the Iron Veil Alpha, and people will say what people say, and none of it will be… She paused. None of it will matter in the way it used to matter. The thing that made it matter was that I had nothing to set against it, that my own sense of my worth was dependent on external confirmation that kept not coming. She looked at the corridor wall, at the old stone. That's changed. Since when? He asked, and she thought about it honestly. Since someone read me accurately in 45 seconds and said I was exactly what was needed for something difficult. She paused, and then spent 5 weeks demonstrating that the accuracy wasn't accidental. He was quiet for a moment. Sarah, he said, the interior thing, the assembled version. I know, she said. I haven't said it. I know, she said again. You don't have to say it in the corridor after a hard day. You can say it properly, somewhere better than this. A pause. When? When the summit is over, she said. When it's finished and we're not in the middle of it. I want to hear it when it's the only thing happening. He turned his head to look at her. The full, direct, completely unmanaged attention. All right, he said. After the summit. After the summit, she agreed. They stood in the corridor for another moment. Two people against an old stone wall in the specific, inhabited quiet that had become their native register. And then, because the summit still had 1 day remaining, and 1 day was not nothing, she straightened, and he straightened beside her, and they walked back toward the light. And she found Kala the following morning at breakfast. The informal, self-serve arrangement of the summit's final day, the room carrying the lighter energy of something that has resolved and is now winding toward its close. She approached directly, because Kala was the kind of person who received directness better than approach, and sat across from her without preamble. The documentation, she said. What Edren knew. You didn't have to tell me that. Kala looked at her with the sharp, honest eyes she'd had from the beginning. No, she agreed. I didn't. Why did you? Kala was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, but genuinely considering. Because I've been watching Edren use that documentation strategy for 11 years, she said. And I've been watching what it cost the packs on the other side of it. And I decided… She paused. I decided that I was done being the person who watches things that aren't right and says nothing because the silence is more comfortable. Sarah held her gaze. That's a significant thing to have decided. Yes, Kala said. It is. A pause. Edrin and I will have a difficult conversation when we return home. About this summit? About several things this summit has clarified. Her voice was level, not distressed. The voice of a woman who has made a hard decision and is past the hardest part of making it. Sarah thought about what to say, thought about 5 years of ceremonies and the gray, familiar thing she'd carried through them, about all the ways the world had told her what she lacked and the specific person it had taken to show her what she had. For what it's worth, she said carefully, well, from someone who has had considerable practice evaluating what people are made of beneath what they show, you are not someone who watches things that aren't right and says nothing. You may have been, but you're not now. Kala looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Where did you learn to do that? Do what? Say the exact true thing, Kala said. That someone needs. Sarah thought about it. I had a very good teacher, she said. Recently, Kala's sharp expression moved. The brief, genuine thing beneath the diplomatic surface. Tell him he chose well, she said. If that's the kind of thing you tell him. It's exactly the kind of thing I tell him, Sarah said. The summit closed at 4 on the final day, with the formal signing of the boundary agreements and the charter amendments that had been negotiated over 3 days. One the 7 alphas signed in order of territory size, Iron Veil third, which placed Gavriel's signature in the middle of the document in the position that was neither first nor last, neither leading nor following, but present in the center where things were held. She watched him sign. His handwriting was what she'd have expected. Precise, undecorated, each letter formed with the exact pressure required and no more. He signed his name the way he did everything, without performance, without flourish. The signature of a man who had no need to announce himself through the weight of his pen. He looked up from the table and found her across the room, in the secondary ring, with the immediate directness of someone whose attention goes where it goes without consultation. She held his gaze. The document was passed along. The ceremony continued. The room moved around them as rooms do, carrying its political conclusions and its social recalibrations and its various private victories and concessions toward the dinner that would close the summit in the formal, celebratory register that summits ended in. She stood in the secondary ring and thought about the word after the summit. He would say it properly somewhere better than a corridor. She would hear it when it was the only thing happening. And then, she let herself for the first time not immediately redirect this thought when it arrived. And then she would not go back to Veyrath alone. The pale blue dress, folded carefully in the Veyrath wardrobe, her mother in the garden gate. The opportunities worth taking are the ones that scare you in the right places. She was scared in the right places. Well, she was also, beneath the scared, underneath it, in the quiet structural foundation that had been building for 5 weeks, more certain than she had ever been of anything in her 22 years. The room moved around her. She stood in it, and breathed, and waited for after. Chapter 10. After. They left Greyville on a Friday morning. The departure had the specific, unhurried energy of a thing that has been completed well. Not the relief of escape. Not the exhausted deflation of something that has cost more than expected, but the settled, quiet fullness of a conclusion that has justified the effort it required. The summit had closed the previous evening with the formal dinner, which had been, in the way of all formal dinners after hard things have resolved, warmer than the preceding days, the room's atmosphere lighter by several degrees, the conversations less guarded and more genuine. Riva had found her near the end of it. "Come to Caldmere," she said without preamble, in the direct way she had for everything. Not soon, but sometime. I'd like to continue the conversation we started about the boundary documentation methodology and other things. I'd like that, Sarah said. Riva had looked at her for a moment with the comprehensive 40 years of people attention. You'll do well, she said. Not a prediction exactly. Something more like the statement of something already visible. Then she had moved away, unhurried, toward the next thing. Calla had embraced her at the departure, briefly, with the firm, unceremonious warmth of a woman who did not make unnecessary gestures and therefore made the necessary ones count. She had said nothing. She hadn't needed to. Farron had not sought her out. She had not sought out Farron. But at the moment of departure, and in the Greyvale courtyard where the delegations assembled with their horses and their travel gear, and the morning mist coming off the frost, she had caught his eye across the distance. He had inclined his head. Minimal, formal, precise. She had returned it. The acknowledgement of two people who had encountered each other honestly and survived the honesty with their respective dignities intact. It was enough. The traveling party reorganized for the return. The same 9 people, the same configuration, but different in the way that the same people are always different after shared experience has done its work on them. Aldrich rode at the rear of the party with Voss, the two of them in what Sarah had come to recognize as their preferred position, watching everything from behind, where they could see the whole formation. And she had overheard them talking the previous evening in the low voices of people who are not hiding what they're saying but are not announcing it either. And she had caught enough to understand that Aldrich's 48 hours of processing had produced the outcome Gavriel had predicted. He was, at this point, more committed to the situation than almost anyone, in the particular way of people whose endorsement cost them something and therefore means something. She rode beside Gavriel. Of course she rode beside Gavriel. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of winter morning that has no ambiguity in it. The light was the light, the cold was the cold. Everything was exactly what it was and made no attempt to be otherwise. She found she liked this. She had always, she thought, been suited to clarity. They did not speak immediately. That this was not silence born of anything unresolved. It was the comfortable, inhabited quiet that had been their native register since somewhere in the second week of Iron Vale, and she had stopped marking it as anything other than what it was. After perhaps 20 minutes of riding, he said, "You said you wanted to hear it somewhere better than a corridor." She looked at him, the morning light on the severe geography of his face, the winter sun catching the angles of it, no flattery, no softening, everything exactly as it was. "I did," she said. He was quiet for a moment, the precision-choosing pause, the one that meant he was deciding between a less accurate and a more accurate version of the thing he wanted to say. "I have been..." He started. Stopped. Started again, but with the deliberate care of someone who does not say important things carelessly and is feeling the weight of this one specifically. "I have been a person for a long time who organized his life around the principle that there were things he didn't have the right to want. Connection, continuity, the ordinary things that people build lives around. I told myself this was pragmatism. I understood eventually that it was fear wearing the shape of principle." She kept her eyes on him. She did not look away, because he was not looking away. "When I stood in the Veyrath ceremonial courtyard and watched you walk across that floor," he said, "I was there because Aldrich had finally run out of patience with my reasons for not attending summits, and had arranged my attendance at the ceremony as a diplomatic courtesy without consulting me until the arrangements were finalized." He paused. "I was not looking for anything. I was..." The interior thing, almost smile, and something more than it. Being difficult about being there. In the specific way I am difficult, which is not loudly. I noticed you immediately, she said, at the edge of the male group. You were the only person in the room who wasn't performing being there. You were the only person in the room, he said, who walked across a space that was actively unkind to her and arrived at the other side of it without having become smaller. She absorbed this, let it settle beside everything else she was carrying. I told myself, he continued, that the inquiry to Elder Marin was strategic, that I had assessed a specific need and identified the correct person to meet it. I believed this with reasonable conviction for approximately 1 week after you arrived at Ironvale. He looked at the road ahead. The winter road, the mountain still ahead of them, the return journey underway. Then I stopped believing it and began the considerably less comfortable process of understanding what was actually happening. Which was, she said, He paused, finding out what it felt like to be in a room with someone whose thinking I could follow, whose accuracy I didn't have to manage for, who said the true thing without being asked and received the true thing without recoiling from it. He was quiet for a moment. I had not known, specifically, what I had been missing. I understand now that the not knowing was a mercy, that because knowing it and not having it would have been significantly harder than not knowing. Gabriel, she said. He looked at her. Say the actual thing, she said, gently but directly. You've been precise about everything since the Elder Hall. Be precise about this. He held her gaze for a moment. The dark green, winter water eyes, all of it assembled. The complete version, the real thing that had been arriving in fragments since the 45th second of a ceremony in a moonlit courtyard. I love you, he said. 3 words. Undecorated. In the same register as agreed and perfect and yes. The register of a man who meant what he said, and said what he meant and had decided, finally and completely, to stop organizing his life around the things he believed he didn't deserve. She felt them land, felt the full, clear weight of them, and the realness of them, the specific difference between words that are said and words that are true. I know, she said. I have known for a while. Then, I love you too. I have known that for a while as well. The almost smile arrived, then past the almost, became the actual thing. The full, genuine, unhurried smile of a man who has set down something very heavy and discovered that the world has not, in fact, ended. She had not seen it before. The full version. It changed his face entirely, not dramatically, not the transformation of someone becoming someone else, but the specific, subtle shift of someone becoming more themselves. The architecture was the same, the severity present in the structure of it, but illuminated now. The difference between a landscape in overcast and the same landscape when the clouds break, as she thought she could look at it for a very long time. After the summit, she said, you said, we're after the summit. We are, he agreed. So, she said, what does after look like? They stopped at midday at a river crossing, one of the natural rest points on the mountain road, where the water came down fast and cold over black stones, and the spray caught the noon light and turned it briefly, brilliantly, into something more than itself. The horses needed it. So, she thought, did the people. Aldrich found her at the river's edge while Gabriel was speaking with Voss about the afternoon route. He came to stand beside her with the direct, unhurried manner that was his native register. Not sidling, not approaching tentatively, just arriving, taking his position, and being present in it. The summit went well, he said. Oh, it did, she agreed. The boundary vote, he said. The Duskmere thing. Reva's endorsement. He was quiet for a moment. I've been to 4 of these summits. I've never seen a situation turned that cleanly. She looked at the river, the cold water over the black stones, the light breaking in the spray. The situation had good fundamentals, she said. We were in the right, historically and legally. We just needed to make that legible. We, Aldrich said, with the specific emphasis of a man noting a word he finds significant. She glanced at him. He was looking at the river too, his broad, honest face in profile, the 15 years with one person expression in a different configuration than she'd seen before. Not the guarded concern of the first dinner. Something else. Something that had been worked through and arrived somewhere better. Oh, I was wrong about this, he said. The arrangement. I thought he was solving a problem and creating a larger one. He paused. I thought he would hurt himself more than the summit could be worth. And now? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Now I think, he said slowly, with the care of someone saying something they've been carrying for a while and have finally decided to put down where it can be seen. That the moon works on longer timelines than mating ceremonies, and that sometimes the path to the right thing looks, from the middle of it, like the wrong thing. She turned to look at him fully. He met her eyes, direct, honest, the expression of a man who has arrived at something that cost him something and is not going to pretend the cost was less than it was. Welcome to Ironvale, he said, while for real this time, she understood. Not the formal arrival at the gate. This moment, at a river crossing, with the cold water and the noon light and everything that had happened between the first moment and this one. She felt something open in her chest. The specific, expansive quality of being genuinely received. Thank you, Aldrich, she said. He nodded. Once, decisive. The motion of a man concluding something he's been working on for 5 weeks. Then he turned and walked back toward the horses. Because he was Aldrich, and he had said what needed to be said, and there was no reason to ornament it. They arrived at Ironvale as the sun was going down. The same gate, the 2 enormous pines grown together over centuries, the Ironvale mark in the roadstone, worn smooth by years of passage, the same cold, resinous air, but the same silver-white light of snow-capped peaks in the last of the day. She had come through this gate once before and found it better than she expected. She came through it this time and found it. She searched for the word, hers. Not in the possessive sense, not the claiming of something external, the recognition of something mutual, the way a place feels yours when you have become part of the grammar of it, when the space has reorganized itself slightly around your presence, and you have reorganized yourself slightly around the space, and neither can now be quite what it was without the other. Nira was at the main hall steps. Of course she was. She had the irrepressible forward momentum and the bright, unguarded brightness that Sarah had been receiving as a form of warmth since the first night, and she was clearly, transparently, entirely unable to remain inside during the arrival of a delegation that had just concluded a summit she had spent 3 days in an agony of not being present for. Well, she said, before any of them had dismounted. The vote went our way, Gabriel said from his horse. Nira turned to Sarah. And? Sarah dismounted. And, she said, with the particular warmth of someone who has decided that some information can be shared freely. A great many other things went our way as well. Nira looked between them with the comprehensive attention of someone reading a situation she has been waiting to read for weeks. Her expression moved through several configurations in rapid succession. Surprise, recalibration, a bright, unconstrained joy that she made absolutely no effort to manage. I knew it, she said, to no one in particular. I told Taya. I said it in the second week. I said, Nira, Gabriel said. I know. She subsided, with the specific vibration of someone containing enthusiasm they have categorized as a social requirement. Then, to Sarah, quietly, with the genuine warmth beneath the irrepressibility, I'm glad you're back. I'm glad to be back, Sarah said, and meant it. Completely, without reservation, without the qualifying machinery she had spent 22 years attaching to things she wanted, without the but and the if only and the when. Just the simple, rooted truth of it. I'm glad to be back. She wrote to her mother that night. Not the careful, balanced letters of the summit weeks. This one was different. Longer, less managed. She sat at the desk in the East Suite that had become, over 6 weeks, and her desk, the one she'd cleared a space on the first day and then slowly, without planning it, expanded until it held the organized, particular accumulation of a mind at work in a place it had decided to stay. She wrote for an hour. She told her mother the summit had concluded well. She told her about Riva and Kala and Aldrich at the river crossing. She told her about the East Garden and the winter morning with tea and the corridor and after the summit. She told her, with the precise, honest language she always used when writing to Hilda, what had changed since the pale blue dress and the 5th mating ceremony and the walk home in the autumn air. She told her that she wasn't coming back alone. She told her, and this was the sentence she wrote last, after everything else, and after she had said all the things that required context and all the things that required precision, she told her, you said the opportunities worth taking are the ones that scare you in the right places. I was scared in the right places, Mom. And the world turned out to be bigger than the ceremonies. She folded the letter, sealed it, set it aside to be sent in the morning. Then she went to the window, the one that looked out over the Iron Veil Mountains in the winter dark, the one she had stood at the night she first acknowledged she didn't want to leave, and stood in it for a moment, looking out at the white peaks against the black sky. She heard the door. Not a knock. A quiet opening. The unhurried entry of someone in a space they belong in. Gabriel came to stand beside her at the window, and they looked out at the mountains together. The same mountains, the same dark, the same long, wave-like sound of wind through the pines below. Your mother, he said, seeing the sealed letter on the desk. Yes. What did you tell her? Everything, she said. In the order it happened. She'll want the order. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my beta of records will need to update the formal documentation, the mating registry, for Iron Veil. She turned to look at him. That's, she said. That's not the arrangement we agreed to. No, he said. It isn't. He held her gaze with the complete assembled attention. The dark green eyes, the full version. The arrangement we agreed to was the minimum of what I intended. I said that in the garden. He paused. I would like to renegotiate the terms. To what? She asked. Though she already knew. She knew in the same clear, rooted way that she'd known she didn't want to leave. That she was scared in the right places. That 5 years of ceremonies had been 5 years of preparation for the specific thing that was now standing beside her at a window looking out at the same mountains they'd both been looking at for 6 weeks. Too permanent, he said, if that is something you want. She looked at him. This specific, severe, careful man who had read her in 45 seconds and spent 5 weeks demonstrating that the reading wasn't an accident, who had asked in a winter garden what she wanted when it was over, who had stood in a corridor and said after the summit, and meant it as a promise. Who had said, "I love you" on a mountain road with the same register as everything else? Plain, undecorated, true. Who had believed for 15 years that he didn't have the right to ask anyone for this, and had asked her anyway, because she had told him that wasn't how rights worked, and he had listened. "Yes," she said. "That is something I want." He took her hand. Not the open palm pack greeting, not the under-the-table contact of the formal dinner. Her hand in his, the full, deliberate, unhurried taking of it. The gesture of a man who has stopped organizing his life around the things he doesn't deserve. They stood at the window together, in the inhabited quiet that was their native register, and looked out at the Iron Veil Mountains in the dark. The moon goddess makes no mistakes. That was what Elder Marin whispered to every young Omega who trembled on the steps of the mating ceremony. Sarah had believed it, in the desperate, a drowning person way of someone who had nothing else to hold to. She understood it differently now, not the way she had believed it at 17, standing in her first ceremony dress with her whole chest open to the possibility. Not even the way she had half believed it at 22, worn smooth by repetition, carrying the word unclaimed like a stone through 5 years of moonlit courtyards. She understood it now the way you understand something that has been proven, not by being told, but by the full, lived weight of its evidence. The moon had not forgotten her. The moon had not overlooked her or found her wanting or made a mistake in her creation. The moon had simply been working on a longer timeline than mating ceremonies. It had been building something that required more than a single moonlit night to assemble, required 5 years of practice holding her expression steady in rooms that found her wanting, required the specific precision of a man who needed exactly that precision in the person beside him, required a pile of dead rosemary in a garden, and a stumble on a paving stone and 45 seconds that had held more real information than 5 years of ceremonies combined. Had been building this. She, who had been unclaimed Sarah from Veyrath, who had attended 5 ceremonies in increasingly careful dresses and come home to her mother's tea and her aunt's comprehensive briefings and the gray, familiar weight of another year without, who had learned, in 5 years of beautiful, moonlit, unkind courtyards, and to walk across spaces that found her wanting and arrive at the other side without having become smaller, who was now standing at a window in the Iron Veil main hall, in the territory that had become hers, beside the man who had read her accurately and kept reading, holding the hand of someone who had chosen her not in spite of what she was, but because of precisely what she was, with the total, unambiguous, permanent intention of someone who had stopped believing he didn't deserve good things and had decided at last to have one. Outside, the Iron Veil Mountains stood in the winter dark. The pines moved in the long, wave-like sound she had started, without noticing when, to find like home. Inside, the fire burned, and Sarah, who had cried alone at 5 mating ceremonies, but who had been told by the world's indifference that she was too plain and too quiet and too unclaimed to matter, stood in the warm light of a place that had made room for exactly her, and held the hand of a man who had known her worth in 45 seconds and spent every day since proving he hadn't been wrong and was not afraid. Not of this. This was not the thing to be afraid of. This was the thing you crossed all the other things to get to. This was after.
Dear listener, before you leave, Sarah was never invisible because she lacked worth. She was invisible because the wrong people were looking. One right person changed everything. So ask yourself, are you still waiting for the right person to see you? Or have you already found them and haven't told them yet? And if this story stayed with you, the like button is right there. One tap. That's all it takes to tell us these stories matter. Thank you for watching.